You've been chasing peace like it's somewhere out there, in the perfect life, the right moment, the next achievement. But if that were true, why do your thoughts still keep spinning? Why does your chest still feel tight when the world goes quiet? Why does now always feel like something you have to escape? The truth is, peace isn't found. It's remembered. It's always been here, underneath the noise, the stories, the pressure to be more. For thousands of years, Buddhist masters have pointed to this hidden stillness, not in temples on mountaintops, but in you, in the space between thoughts, in the breath you never noticed, in the silence you've been afraid to sit with. This isn't just another sleep audio. This is a return to the present moment, to your original calm, to the deep quiet that nothing can disturb. Tonight, as you listen, something will shift. Your body will soften, your mind will slow, and a new kind of peace will begin to rise, not from outside, but from within the silence you forgot you had. This is the beginning of a different kind of rest, one that doesn't just help you sleep, but helps you wake up, to life, to truth, to the now. Are you ready? Let's begin. Most people don't notice the moment before they act. They're too busy being pulled by thoughts, by emotion, by habit. You feel an urge, and before you even realize what's happening, you've already responded. You've said the thing, reached for the phone, raised your voice, made the decision. That's karma in motion. Not some force from a past life, but the deeply familiar pattern that repeats itself again and again in your everyday life. But what few people realize is this: karma doesn't start when the action happens. Karma begins in the instant before. That split second where a thought, a feeling, or a desire starts to move. That micro moment when something arises inside you and quietly says, "Do this." That's where karmic intention, cetana, is born. And if you can see it there, if you can meet it before it turns into action, something powerful happens. You're no longer reacting, you're choosing. This is where awareness becomes freedom. In Buddhist teachings, intention is everything. It's not just what you do, it's why you do it. The deeper the awareness of your intention, the less karma you create. Not because you're being good, but because you're awake at the root of action. You're not sleepwalking through your choices anymore. You're aware of the seed, not just the fruit. To get here, though, you have to slow way down. Not just your body, your mind, your breath, your attention. Slowing down doesn't mean pausing your life. It means becoming so sensitive that you can feel the tiniest ripple before the wave forms. You start to notice how often you're already halfway through reacting before you even know what you're reacting to. You start to feel how volition begins as a stirring, a soft pull inside your chest, a shift in energy behind your eyes, a tightening in the belly. That's the birthplace of karma, and it's also the most powerful place to rest your attention. This is not about controlling yourself. That's still ego. That's still fear. This is about seeing yourself so clearly, so intimately, that no reaction can hide anymore. You start to live from the source of choice, not from the noise on the surface. When you become aware of this, daily life transforms. Simple moments, someone cutting you off in traffic, a rude message, a craving, a moment of boredom, become your greatest teachers. You begin to feel the push of habit trying to take over, and instead of following it, you watch. You feel the impulse but don't obey it. You're not frozen, you're free. And that space between the impulse and the action, that's the doorway. That's where stillness lives. That's where karma loses its grip. That's where you meet the present moment, not as a prisoner, but as a master. Most people spend their entire lives reacting to life like a pinball, bouncing from one thing to the next, never realizing they have the power to pause before the bounce. But not you. Not anymore. When you start training awareness at the root of action, you'll begin to sense this gap more often. At first, it might only be a flicker, a brief breath, a sense of, wait, before you do what you always do. That's gold. That flicker is enough. Don't try to stretch it. Just rest there. Don't rush to fix, solve, or suppress. Rest. That resting, pure, alert, simple awareness has a power far greater than any reaction. It's not passive, it's awake. It sees everything, but it holds nothing. And the more you train your attention to rest in that still point before volition arises, the more your actions start coming from wisdom, not fear, from clarity, not confusion, from peace, not pain. There's a Tibetan term, Nyingje, often translated as tender heart. When you stay close to that instant before karma arises, your heart starts to soften. Because in that moment, you're not in a fight with yourself. You're not rushing to be right or safe or seen. You're simply present. And in presence, there's space. And in space, compassion is natural. You might notice that when you rest in that moment before, the need to be someone, prove something, or defend anything starts to dissolve. There's no story yet, no narrative, no me being built. Just this quiet awareness, this raw, luminous seeing. From here, it becomes clear. Your deepest peace doesn't come from changing your life. It comes from changing your relationship to the moment before your life unfolds. That moment is where suffering begins, and where freedom begins too. The mind is tricky, though. It will try to skip over that space. It doesn't like stillness. It likes momentum. It likes control. It likes to say, I already know what this is. Let's go. But if you're alert, you'll feel that rush. You'll see the mind lean forward, and instead of following it, you'll stay. You'll rest. This rest isn't sleepy. It's awake. It's a kind of sacred pause. It doesn't resist anything. It simply notices everything. And in that noticing, something dissolves. The urgency, the fear, the false belief that you have to act to feel real. You begin to understand that most of your suffering doesn't come from life itself, but from unconscious momentum. That push to fix the discomfort, chase the feeling, complete the loop. And once you sit in the space before that push takes over, the loop loses its power. Some days, that space might feel small and fragile. Other days, it opens wide like the sky. Don't measure it. Don't expect it to feel a certain way. Just return, again and again, to that instant before you reach, before you react, before you move. This is the root of all meditation, not sitting quietly to escape life, but sitting to feel it, deeply, completely, before the mind rushes to explain or control it. And once you train your awareness in this way, even the most intense moments become workable. You'll feel anger begin, but before the shout, you're already resting. You'll feel fear arise, but before the spiral, you're already still. You'll feel longing stir, but before the grasping, you're already whole. There's a beauty in this kind of presence that words can't fully describe. It's not dramatic, it's not loud, but it's incredibly powerful. Because when you live from this place, you're not adding more karma to the world. You're not acting from wounds. You're not fueling the wheel of suffering. You're resting in the still point where wisdom begins. And over time, this begins to change the shape of your life. Your relationships soften. Your reactions slow. Your inner noise starts to quiet. You don't need as much from the world because you're living closer to the source. You become less interested in being right, more interested in being real, less focused on outcomes, more attuned to presence. There's a calm that comes when you no longer need to follow every thought. A clarity that arises when you don't have to believe every emotion. A strength that forms when you can stand in the storm of desire without being swept away. All of this starts in that split second before karma begins. That invisible instant where choice still lives in its purest form, not yet shaped by habit or fear or memory. That's the birthplace of your freedom. It's subtle. It won't scream for your attention, but it's always there, like a still pool under the rushing stream. And the more you practice resting there, the more that pool becomes your home. This is not a technique. It's a way of being, a way of relating to life that doesn't require constant fixing or chasing. It's not about doing nothing, it's about doing from nothing. Acting from presence, not panic. Moving from depth, not impulse. Even as you listen now, notice what's arising in you. Is there a thought forming, a feeling, a pull? Can you feel the beginning of it, not the full wave, just the ripple? Stay there, rest there. Let it come and go without needing to become it. That's the art. That's the invitation. And once you begin, there's no need to rush, no goal to reach, just this breath, just this moment, just this awareness, gently resting at the root of it all. You're not late, you're not behind, you're right where you need to be, right at the edge of transformation. And the more you live from this quiet space, this pre-volitional awareness, the more peace becomes your natural state. Not because life gets easier, but because you're no longer pulled by every wind. You've found the anchor. You've touched the ground before thought, before reaction, before identity. And from here, the entire path opens. Let's continue. You've touched the moment before karma. You've seen how quiet it can be, how choice begins not in words or decisions, but in a soft ripple beneath the surface. But even that stillness points to something deeper, something untouched by time, untouched by effort. Not just the pause before reaction, but the field that holds all things before they even start. The mind before thought, the knowing before the knower. It's not hidden. You've always been looking from it, not at it. And now it's time to return. The unborn mind isn't a concept. It can't be turned into a technique or described with precision. It's not a thought, a feeling, or even a silence you can capture. It's what remains when everything else disappears. When the self dissolves, when effort ends, when even the watcher fades. You don't have to create this awareness. You only need to notice that it never began. It was never born, so it can't die. It's the background of every experience you've ever had, even the ones you didn't notice. Buddhist teachings call it Tathagatagarbha, Buddha nature. But don't let the word distract you. This isn't about religion or belief. It's about direct contact with the source of consciousness itself, not the stories of the mind, not the shifting moods, not the stream of images and labels that come and go, but what allows all of that to appear. And the moment you stop trying to grasp it, you start to feel it, not as something distant or mystical, but as the most obvious thing you've always overlooked. You've lived your whole life thinking thoughts are yours, feelings are yours, desires are yours. But have you ever stopped to question who you actually is? That thought of self, the voice in your head that claims ownership of everything. It's just another appearance, another movement in the field. The mind stream flows, but the unborn mind never moves. It's still, not because it's frozen, but because it's whole, complete, without lack, without need. When you recognize this, something shifts. The fight begins to fade. You no longer feel the need to fix yourself. You don't need to become anything. The constant search for meaning, improvement, validation, all of it starts to feel like static on a channel you no longer need to tune into. Not because you're avoiding life, but because you're beginning to experience it as it is, before interpretation touches it. Pure presence, clear seeing. This isn't dissociation. It's the opposite. You're more connected, not less. But you're no longer caught in the sticky web of personal identity. You see thoughts arise and pass. You watch emotion form and fade. You witness urges, stories, sensations, each one appearing in awareness and then dissolving back into it. And the awareness itself, it doesn't move, it doesn't change. It's not something you create in meditation. It's something you fall back into when striving stops. This is why practices that go beyond concentration are so important. Concentration can calm the mind, but it often reinforces a doer, a self that's trying to reach peace through control. But awareness of the unborn mind isn't about control. It's about letting go so completely that even the one who's letting go disappears. There's no subject-object split, no observer watching an object. There's just knowing, just being, just a presence that holds all things, untouched by what it holds. And this is what ends inner struggle. Not by fixing your mind, but by realizing that your mind was never the problem. You were just identifying with the waves and forgetting the ocean. Thoughts aren't the issue. They're just energy moving. What creates suffering is the belief that you are the thinker, the one who must manage, suppress, analyze, or escape the mind's activity. But when you recognize the unborn mind, the struggle with thought ends. Because you no longer fear the storm, you know the sky was never affected. Sometimes people hear this and think it means becoming blank or empty. But this presence is far from dull. It's luminous, alive, aware without effort. It doesn't block experience. It allows all of it without resistance. Pain arises and there's room. Joy arises and there's space. Confusion, clarity, desire, doubt, they come and go like clouds. But the open sky of awareness remains, and the more you rest in that recognition, the more natural it becomes. Not because you're trying to hold on to a state, but because you're not resisting what is. You're not forcing experience into a shape. You're not shrinking reality into what the ego can accept. You're meeting life with no filter, no defense, no agenda, just open, alert presence. At first, the mind will try to pull you back into form. It will try to define what's happening. Is this it? Am I doing it right? But all of that is just noise, and you don't have to fight it. You simply let it pass, like wind across still water. The moment you identify with the commentary, you contract. The moment you see the commentary as just more movement within stillness, you return. And in that return, you discover something unexpected. Peace wasn't missing. It was simply obscured, not by something evil or wrong, just by layers of activity that were never questioned. Now you're questioning. Now you're seeing. And in that seeing, the need to be someone drops away. The need to achieve peace turns into resting as peace. This isn't a feeling you have. It's the ground of being you are, not the character you play, not the thoughts you think, but the space that lets the entire play unfold, even this moment, even this breath, even these words, all arising from the unborn mind and returning to it. No effort needed, no fixing required, just presence. When this becomes your reference point, everything changes. Not because the world outside shifts, but because the clinging inside softens. You still feel, you still care, but you're not driven by lack. You're not trying to complete yourself through action. You already feel whole, not because you've solved every problem, but because you no longer believe you're broken. And this changes how you relate to thought. Before, thoughts were commands. Now they're just suggestions. Before, emotions felt like truth. Now they're just weather. Before, experience defined your self-worth. Now there's no self to measure. There's only awareness, watching the dance without needing to change the steps. You'll find that this recognition doesn't make you distant. It makes you real. Because you're no longer hiding behind masks. You're no longer filtering everything through judgment or preference. You're simply meeting each moment as it arises, without commentary. And from that clarity, compassion grows. Not the kind you force, but the kind that flows naturally when you stop protecting an identity. Every tradition has tried to point to this. Zen calls it the original face before your parents were born. Dzogchen calls it Rigpa. Some call it the witness. Others call it awareness itself. But the label doesn't matter. What matters is your direct experience. Not as a fleeting insight, but as a living truth you can return to again and again, not by reaching for it, but by relaxing into it. And the more you rest in this unborn awareness, the more you see how much of your life was built on mental habits that never needed to be followed. You see how much energy you spent resisting what already was. You see how the mind tried to fix itself by thinking more, striving more, hoping more. And now you see that peace was never something you could get. It was something you had to stop searching for. There's a deep humility in this, a soft surrender, because you realize you can't do awakening. You can only stop doing what hides it. You can only rest. And in that rest, the mind quiets, the self-image fades, and what remains isn't empty. It's full of presence, clarity, stillness, not as concepts, but as lived truth. From here, even pain changes, not because it vanishes, but because it's no longer resisted. Suffering loses its edge when it's met with awareness, not because you rise above it, but because you fall into the ground that holds it all. Even death loses its weight here, because you're no longer identified with what can end. You've tasted what was never born, and what was never born can never die. This doesn't mean you walk around in a trance. It means you're deeply here, fully alive, open to the rawness of each moment, but untouched by its story. You laugh more, you cry more, but you don't cling, and you don't turn away. You're simply present, and presence is the most healing thing there is. So now, as you rest, feel into this. Not with thought, not with effort. Just let awareness be aware. No object, no subject, no goal. Let it notice itself, not as a thing, but as the space where everything appears. Stay here, not by holding, but by not moving away. This is the unborn mind. This is the end of struggle. This is the beginning of peace. When the mind no longer clings and awareness rests in its natural state, what remains is not just internal stillness, but a quiet that begins to shape everything, including the body. It's not enough to see clearly. The way you sit, the way you breathe, the way you hold yourself in space, these also speak. Your posture is your practice. Your stillness is not passive, it becomes visible. It communicates something before a single word is said. There is a presence that moves without movement, a silence that spreads not just through thought, but through the entire body. And when you understand this, your practice deepens beyond the mind. It becomes embodied, direct, unmistakable. The body is not separate from awareness. Every thought leaves a trace in the flesh. The mind leans forward and the shoulders tighten. A subtle fear passes through and the breath shallows. A quiet urge arises and the fingers move. Even if you don't notice, the body reacts faster than the conscious mind, but it can also become the doorway back. Because before you think, you move. And if you train attention to catch the motion before it builds, you begin to anchor your stillness not just in insight, but in form. There's a discipline in stillness, not the kind that suppresses, but the kind that listens deeply. Sitting without shifting, hands resting without tension, breath flowing without grasping. This is a language of presence. It's not frozen, it's fully alive. But it does not chase, it does not flinch. This is what the ancient teachers meant by mudra, not just a hand shape, but a container for consciousness, a gesture that holds a frequency of attention. You might think of a mudra as symbolic, but it's more than symbol. It's structure. It's what happens when you let the body speak truth without distortion. Not through performance, but through quiet precision. The way you place your hands in your lap, the way your spine rises, not from pride, but from alignment with what is. The way your eyes soften, not drifting, but rooted in presence. Each part of the body becomes a mirror for still awareness, and that mirror reflects not effort, but absence. This absence is not nothingness. It's the absence of struggle, the absence of reactivity, the absence of reaching. And the body, when practiced in this stillness, begins to remember what it is without tension. You sit, and something old drops away. You stop adjusting for comfort, and the discomfort dissolves. Not because the pain goes away, but because the story around it fades. You are no longer reacting to sensation. You are simply allowing it. You do not collapse. You do not resist. You rest in form without clinging to form. This is non-doing. In daily life, the impulse to act comes with subtle shifts, fingers twitching, shoulders leaning forward, breath changing pace. When you begin to notice these shifts, you see how often you are preparing to react even before thought arises. But you can stop here. You can pause in the body. You can stay in the posture of stillness. And in doing so, you reverse the current. Instead of reinforcing habit, you begin dissolving it through non-participation. This non-doing is not the same as laziness. It's not escape. It's full participation in the present without adding anything. The body becomes a grounded field where urges can rise and pass without being acted upon. And each time you resist the temptation to adjust, to explain, to flinch, you build a deeper relationship with equanimity. You learn that not every feeling requires a gesture. Not every discomfort needs a solution. Some things simply need to be witnessed, fully, without movement. Traditional Buddhist postures are not arbitrary. The crossed legs, the upright spine, the still hands, these are not just aesthetic. They are refined over centuries to support this kind of deep resting. But even if you are lying down, standing, or walking, you can bring this same awareness. It's not about the position itself, it's about the intention, the choice to let the body become still enough for the mind to reflect its clarity. And in this stillness, the boundaries between mind and body start to dissolve. Movement can return, of course. This isn't about becoming a statue. Life requires movement. But when movement arises from stillness, it carries a different energy. It is not compulsive. It is not anxious. It is simple, direct, whole. You raise your hand to scratch, and it's just that, a movement. No commentary, no justification. You shift your weight, not because you're restless, but because the moment called for it. This kind of movement is free. It doesn't disturb the silence. It emerges from it. To train in this way, bring awareness to the micro gestures throughout your day. The way your fingers tap the table while waiting. The way your feet shift when discomfort rises. The way you reach for your phone without really needing it. Start noticing these, not to judge, but to understand. Every unconscious gesture is a message. It says, I don't want to be here. I want to be somewhere else. And when you notice it, you have a choice. You can stop. You can breathe. You can return. In this return, you learn something about your nervous system. That it doesn't need to be on alert all the time. That safety isn't found in constant motion. That calm can be practiced through posture alone. The way you sit becomes the way you live. Rooted, balanced, responsive, but not reactive. This is not abstract philosophy. This is real. It's physical. It's tangible. The body is not a burden on the path. It is the path. And the more you include it, the more complete your presence becomes. Over time, this awareness becomes second nature. You don't have to think about it, you feel it. The body begins to align naturally with the space of stillness. You find yourself sitting a little taller, not to look proper, but because gravity feels more honest when you're not resisting. You breathe more deeply, not to relax, but because the breath has room. You move less, but experience more. Each moment becomes fuller, not because you're doing more, but because you're present in what is. Some teachings refer to this as the mudra of absence, not because you're absent, but because the unnecessary effort has left. What remains is clean, whole. This is a kind of sacred simplicity. Nothing added, nothing removed. Just this body, just this breath, just this now. Even pain, even discomfort, even desire, all of it held gently in a body that does not need to act it out. This stillness doesn't mean your life becomes dull. It means it becomes clear. Reactions no longer own you. You are no longer caught in unconscious loops of motion. Your hands no longer speak fear. Your shoulders no longer echo worry. Your breath no longer tells the story of control. Your body becomes the proof of your awareness, not because it's perfect, but because it reflects presence. Even in sleep, the body carries the imprint of your attention. The way you lay down, the way your breath settles, the way your limbs find rest, it all speaks. The more you practice stillness during the day, the more the body remembers how to release at night. Rest becomes easier, deeper, more complete, because the body trusts that it doesn't need to be ready to run. The nervous system unwinds not through effort, but through permission, through safety born from presence. This kind of trust can't be faked. It comes only when you stop negotiating with discomfort, when you stop asking the body to feel different before you allow stillness, when you stop adjusting your posture every time something stirs. The body begins to feel that it is allowed to stay, that it is safe to settle. And from that place, a very deep kind of peace begins to grow, not a fragile calm that disappears with tension, but a durable, embodied peace that includes tension without collapsing into it. This practice is not about holding one posture forever. It's about the quality of being in the posture you are in, the stillness you carry while chopping vegetables, while tying your shoes, while folding laundry. Each action can become an extension of the mudra. Not just your hands, but your entire body becomes the gesture of awareness. No movement wasted, no energy scattered, everything integrated, everything returning to the root. And what's at the root is not numbness, it's aliveness without reaction. A body awake without tension, a presence that does not cling. Over time, your life starts to reflect this, not in dramatic changes, but in how it feels to wake up, in how it feels to speak without rushing, in how it feels to be touched by sensation and not pushed by it. You are not deadening the senses, you are refining them. You are tuning the instrument so precisely that the music can be heard in the silence. You may begin to notice that others feel different around you, not because you are doing anything to them, but because your body is no longer sending the signal of urgency. You're not broadcasting stress. You're not radiating fear. You've stopped rehearsing the next move, and they feel that stillness. Some may not know why they feel calmer around you, but they do, because the nervous system responds to presence, and when your presence is grounded, their body feels the invitation to ground as well. This is what it means to embody the practice, to let your stillness speak louder than your words, to let your posture remind others that peace is possible even in the middle of chaos, even in the middle of a crowded room. You don't have to teach it, you don't have to explain it. You are it, and that's more than enough. So let the body rest, let the hands settle, let the shoulders drop, let the breath come and go like the tide. Do nothing, not out of laziness, but out of deep listening. Hold the posture of peace, not as performance, but as truth. Let your form carry the stillness your mind has remembered. Let your presence teach without words. Let your absence of struggle become the most powerful thing in the room. And stay here. Stay in this body that needs nothing added. Stay in this moment that requires no improvement. Stay in this shape that speaks silence. Stillness doesn't always come from silence. Sometimes it comes from listening deeply, so deeply that even the fading of a sound becomes a teacher. When the body stops moving and the breath settles, the senses sharpen, not to react, but to receive. Sound, which once seemed ordinary, now becomes a door, a reminder of how everything rises, lasts for a moment, and dissolves. Not just words or music or noise, but the whole of life. And if you listen closely, you don't just hear sound, you hear impermanence. You hear the truth of change, wrapped in the simplest vibration. This practice begins not with exotic mantras or sacred chants, but with what is already here. The sound of the wind, a distant voice, the hum of electricity. Each one has a shape, a beginning, and an end. But what we often miss is the ending, the way the sound fades, loses strength, and returns to the quiet it came from. The mind is trained to notice what starts, to name it, identify it. But rarely does it stay for the part that truly matters, the decay. That subtle vanishing is where the deepest insights live. You start to hear how sound is not a solid object. It's movement, it's vibration through space. It doesn't belong to anyone. It doesn't last. The very nature of sound is to disappear. And yet, when a sound fades, we often don't notice. We move on too quickly. Our attention drifts to the next thing. But when you slow down and rest in awareness, you can follow it all the way to its end. And in that ending, something else begins. Not noise, not silence, but a spacious presence that holds both. There is a quiet intelligence in listening like this, not listening to react or remember, but to fully receive. As the sound softens, so does the need to control. You begin to trust the flow of things. You start to feel the beauty of what doesn't need to stay, and you learn without effort that peace isn't found in holding on. It's found in letting go as things naturally complete themselves. Sound becomes your meditation object, not because it's special, but because it's constant. Life is full of sounds. You don't need to create them. You just need to hear what's already present. And you don't need to follow every sound to its source. The source doesn't matter. The echo is the teaching. The fact that it ends, and that something in you can remain quiet enough to witness it. At first, this kind of listening feels strange. The mind wants to label each sound. Dog barking, footsteps, music. It wants to decide. Pleasant or unpleasant, loud or soft, annoying or relaxing. But deeper than all that is the sound itself, its shape, its curve, its fade. You listen not for the meaning of the sound, but for the end of it. You track it, softly, without strain, like following a feather as it falls. At some point, it disappears. And in that moment, you feel space open. That space is not a lack. It's fullness. The fullness of now. The fullness that doesn't need anything added to it. When you train the ear in this way, your entire relationship to time shifts. You begin to live in the subtle rather than the dramatic. You begin to notice transitions rather than outcomes. You begin to let experiences close on their own without forcing, rushing, or analyzing. And from this listening, a new kind of patience arises. You stop pushing away what's loud or clinging to what's beautiful. You hear both with the same kind of interest. The fading of a harsh sound teaches you that nothing lasts. The soft trail of a song reminds you that even the sweetest things end. And it doesn't make you sad. It makes you quiet, not withdrawn, awake. Listening becomes the way you stay close to change without resisting it. Even in conversation, you notice the difference. You're no longer waiting to speak. You're listening for what's not being said. The tone, the break, the pause between words. These spaces carry truth. They reveal more than the surface. They show you where attention lives. And when you listen with your whole body, not just your ears, the person speaking feels seen, not just heard. This is presence. This is what it means to listen beyond noise. Sounds aren't obstacles to meditation, they are part of it. When you stop treating the world's soundscape as distraction, everything becomes practice. The clink of a cup, the creak of a door, a child's laugh, a distant siren. Each sound arrives, and each one dissolves, just like thoughts, just like sensations. And in tracking that disappearance, your awareness stays grounded in reality, not in concepts, but in actual experience. This is where non-reactivity deepens, because when you truly hear how nothing stays, the urge to fight life softens. You stop building your identity around what you hear. You stop telling stories about what sounds mean about you. You just hear them, let them pass, let them teach, let them leave. And the more you listen in this way, the more your sense of self becomes transparent. You no longer need to insert yourself into every moment. You begin to hear the world without becoming the center of it. And strangely, this makes you feel more connected, not less. Because you are no longer holding yourself apart from the flow, you are inside it, listening, not controlling, allowing, not resisting. Even the sound of your own voice begins to change. You hear the tension in your words, the tone that carries your mood, the rhythm of your breath between sentences, and you start to soften. You speak more slowly, more clearly, with less need to fill the space. You speak from quiet, not from noise. And when you're silent, it's not uncomfortable. It's full. It holds the same weight as the words. In formal meditation, sound can be a primary object, not to concentrate in a rigid way, but to train the mind to rest in change. You might sit and simply listen, nothing more. No need to identify or judge. Just hear what's there and follow it until it's gone. Over and over. This softens the mind. It makes you more available, more fluid, less attached. There is also a healing in this, because many forms of suffering come from clinging to ideas, to identities, to moments we want to last. But when you start to listen to how every sound decays, you begin to feel where your attachments begin. And when you feel that, you can relax them. You can let things end without feeling abandoned. You can stay present through change without holding your breath. Eventually you notice that silence isn't the opposite of sound. It's its companion. Every sound carries silence with it, before, during, and after. And when the sound ends, silence is what remains. That silence isn't just the absence of noise. It's a kind of presence, a deep, undisturbed field. And when you rest there, even for a moment, something inside you remembers what it means to be at ease. This ease is not dull. It's alert. It listens not just with the ear, but with the whole of being. This is where the path becomes embodied. You don't just understand impermanence, you feel it. Not as a thought, but as vibration ending. You feel it in the throat that speaks, in the footstep that fades, in the breath that leaves. And once you know this through sound, you begin to know it everywhere. You see it in relationships, how each interaction rises and passes. You feel it in emotion, how even the strongest wave cannot hold. You feel it in desire, how chasing never fulfills because fulfillment can't stay. And instead of hardening against this truth, you soften. You stop trying to capture what must leave, and you begin to love without grasping, to hear beauty without needing to own it, to be here fully without fear of what ends. This listening changes your pace. You walk slower. You speak with more care. You respond rather than react. You begin to live like a sound, arriving fully, expressing what needs to be expressed, then fading naturally into what's next. No drama, no resistance, just full presence and quiet release. When sound becomes your teacher, everything becomes more vivid. Not because life changes, but because you are finally here to meet it. Fully, deeply, without rush. And even in the noisiest places, you carry that inner quiet. That knowing that all things pass. That peace is not the absence of sound, but the absence of clinging. So let the sounds around you be what they are. Don't chase them, don't push them away. Let them rise, let them fade, and follow them with the gentleness of a mind that no longer needs to hold. Let each sound return you to the truth of change, to the peace that comes not from silence, but from knowing that nothing lasts, and that's okay. When you listen deeply enough, you start noticing something strange. The sound fades, but who exactly is listening? Not your name, not your history, not your voice, just awareness. It has no edge. It doesn't belong anywhere in particular. It knows what's happening, but it doesn't feel separate from it. This quiet noticing has no center. And when you stop trying to find the you behind the attention, peace reveals itself not as something added, but as what remains when the idea of self is no longer in the way. The belief in a central observer runs deep. From childhood, we're taught that we're behind our eyes, inside our head, calling the shots, watching the movie of life from a fixed seat. But when you stop and examine this carefully, something opens. You see that attention doesn't come from a single place. You can look at a tree and feel the seeing happening, but where is it happening from? Is it behind your forehead, in the eyes, in the chest? As you investigate, the harder you search for the source, the more you realize it isn't there. You feel thoughts arise. You feel sensations shift. But the you that was supposed to be experiencing it all is nowhere to be found. It's not in the body, not in the thoughts, not even in the awareness itself. What we call me is a habit of perspective, a mental reference point that's been repeated so often it seems real. But the actual experience of awareness has no fixed center. It's wide, open, and clear. It includes everything and resists nothing. This realization doesn't come from thinking about it. It comes from looking directly. Each time you turn your attention toward the sense of I, you find an empty space, not blank, not void, but free. You were never the one behind the controls. You were the field in which everything appeared, thoughts, emotions, sounds, sensations, and that field never claimed ownership of any of it. It just noticed, silently, without effort. The experience of dissolving this center is not disorienting. It's grounding in a different way. It relieves you from the tension of constantly being someone. You feel the softening in the eyes, in the chest, in the breath. The tight focus of identity relaxes. There's no need to hold your shape. Awareness doesn't disappear, it expands. It loses the hard edges of self-reference and becomes less personal, more inclusive. The world is no longer something outside of you. It's just here, happening, unfolding, known without separation. This knowing without a knower is often overlooked because it's so ordinary. We keep expecting peace to feel special, different, like a breakthrough. But real peace comes when you stop trying to locate it inside a self. It's what arises when you're not defending a center. It's the ease that emerges when there's no longer a you watching everything else. Just the watching, just the hearing, just the sensing. This shift doesn't require new beliefs. It requires honesty with what's already happening. You notice how attention moves without anyone directing it. You see how sensations come and go without asking for permission. You observe how thoughts appear, float across the screen of awareness, and vanish without needing a thinker to create them. Everything is already functioning. The sense of a central me is not the source of this activity. It's a story added afterward. What's profound is that this realization isn't an escape. It brings you closer to life. Because when the center dissolves, the barrier between you and experience falls away. There's less filtering, less grasping. Emotions still arise, but they don't define anything. Fear is felt, but it's not my fear. Joy comes, but it doesn't need to be held. Everything is temporary, and now you know it can pass without taking you with it. This non-local awareness isn't spaced out or distant. It's precise. You can focus on a sound, a breath, a sensation, but you're not focusing from anywhere. There's attention, but no reference point. That's why it's restful, because the strain of being the one who's always doing, always watching, always thinking, it disappears. There is just experience, unfolding naturally without a center to protect. You might notice that even the question, "Who am I?" begins to dissolve. It doesn't need an answer anymore, not because the answer is hidden, but because the question itself assumes there's someone to find. When that assumption drops, only presence remains, and presence, by its nature, is complete. It doesn't need identity to function. It doesn't need a self to validate it. It knows itself by being. This kind of being can feel unfamiliar at first. Without the usual landmarks of me and mine, the mind searches for something to grab onto. But if you stay steady, resting in this open attention without retreating into thought, what arises is a stability that has nothing to do with control. It's not brittle. It's not holding itself together. It simply doesn't fall apart because there's nothing separate to collapse. From this view, even the idea of inside and outside begins to fade. You're not in your head looking out. You're not trapped behind a face. Experience is not happening to you, it just is. And that's the freedom. There's nothing missing, nothing to improve, nothing to become. You're no longer watching life from a fixed seat. You're dissolved in it, and at the same time, fully clear. In daily life, this shift brings a subtle but powerful change. Interactions lose their weight. You speak, you listen, you feel, but there's less attachment to the role you're playing. Words are just sounds moving through the field. Thoughts are just flashes of meaning. There's no someone trying to hold it all together. And yet, everything becomes more vivid, more real, because it's not filtered through the need to defend or perform a self. The body starts to relax in a new way. Not slumped, not spaced out, but no longer compressed by identity. You stand, walk, breathe, without the invisible tension of me. There's lightness in your movement. Not because you're trying to be mindful, but because the effort to be someone is gone. Life flows more easily when there's no center trying to push it. Even during conflict, this spacious attention remains. You may feel anger or frustration, but you see it without becoming it. You don't need to protect a position. You're not the center of a personal drama. Emotions rise in the same field where thoughts and sounds rise, and they dissolve in the same way. The peace here is not passive. It's clear, unshaken, because there's no one to be shaken. This realization doesn't make you passive or indifferent. It makes you intimate with what is. Actions still happen. Choices are still made, but they come from clarity, not from a center trying to prove or protect itself. This is not about disappearing. It's about appearing fully, without distortion. When there's no self pulling attention inward, the whole world becomes immediate, vibrant, alive. Over time, you may begin to notice how much energy was spent maintaining the illusion of self, how many decisions were shaped by the need to be seen, known, liked. How much suffering came from trying to hold on to a center that was never real. And when this effort drops, life becomes simpler. Not because challenges vanish, but because you're no longer inventing someone to suffer them. This doesn't mean you lose the ability to say, I, or use your name. The functional self remains. Language continues. But the felt sense of being a separate observer begins to fade. What's left is freedom, not because you've escaped life, but because you're finally not resisting it. The center that suffered was only a thought. Now, that thought no longer holds power. Even when you close your eyes and rest in awareness, you may start to see how wide it is. There's no boundary, no limit, and within it, everything is allowed. Sounds, thoughts, sensations, memories, they all appear and disappear, and none of them require you to be someone. You are not the voice narrating. You are the openness where the narration happens. This openness becomes your new ground, not fixed, not static, but always available. It doesn't collapse when difficulty arises. It doesn't break when pain comes. It simply holds it all. And you realize that peace was never something you needed to build. You just had to stop building a center that blocked it. So now you rest. Not as someone, not from somewhere. Just rest. Attention without location. Awareness without owner. Being without boundary. That's all. And that's enough. When the search for a center dissolves, something unexpected is left behind. There's no one to protect, no one to elevate, just presence. And yet, almost instantly, the old habit begins to whisper again. Now that you're aware, now that you've seen through the illusion, it's time to be better. This voice is soft but persistent. It speaks the language of self-improvement, of higher versions of the self, of cleaner, more spiritual versions of identity. And if you don't see it clearly, it will pull you back into the same suffering, dressed in different clothes. This is where the mind tries to upgrade itself endlessly. It's not the old craving for money, status, or success anymore. It's craving inner purity, perfect awareness, a spotless mind. It reads ancient texts and interprets them as a checklist. It turns the teachings of awakening into a competition. It starts judging the old self, trying to remove every flaw as if presence were a kind of performance. The desire to be free becomes another form of grasping. But peace doesn't come through polishing the self. It comes through realizing that there's no self to perfect. The dust you think you need to wipe off the mirror is not the problem. The problem is believing the mirror was ever dirty. Awareness doesn't need to be cleaned. What needs to be dropped is the belief that you, as a separate person, must become someone else to be whole. This is where self-help becomes subtle ego. The idea that there's always something missing, something broken, something you must fix to finally deserve rest. But the one doing the fixing is part of the illusion. The endless strategies, rituals, diets, books, apps, and techniques all feed the sense that you're not quite there. They postpone presence. They reinforce lack. They convince you that peace lies one step ahead, always out of reach. This is not a rejection of growth. It's a shift in where growth comes from. Growth, when real, happens because it's natural, not because it's forced. It arises from awareness itself, not from the pressure of a self who wants to be impressive. A tree doesn't grow by trying harder. It grows by being rooted, by receiving what it needs and letting life shape it without resistance. You are no different. Radical self-acceptance isn't laziness, it's clarity. It sees the impulse to improve as just another wave in the mind, and instead of chasing it, it stays rooted in presence. Not to be better, but to be real. Not to escape flaws, but to see that flaws don't define reality. You may feel anger, confusion, desire, fear, but none of these need to be eliminated for peace to arise. They only need to be seen without a story. The belief that peace comes after perfection is the oldest trap. It keeps you suspended between guilt and hope, always trying, never arriving. But the truth is, nothing needs to be added. The mirror was always reflecting clearly. The dust was never permanent. It only looked like it mattered when you forgot to see through it. The mind can be noisy. The emotions can be messy. The history can be heavy. But the one who sees all of it, the awareness itself, has never been touched by any of it. Letting go of the will to improve doesn't mean giving up your life. It means ending the war within it. You can still learn, grow, create, but not from a place of lack. You're not trying to become. You're living what already is. You stop asking, "What's wrong with me?" and start asking, "Who is the one that believes something is wrong?" And in that question, the illusion of a fixer collapses. You may notice how often the desire to improve hides fear. Fear of being rejected, unloved, irrelevant. The spiritual ego learns to cover this fear with a layer of language, mindfulness, alignment, elevation. But underneath, the same tightness remains, the same inability to rest. Because as long as you believe there's a final version of you out there, you will never be still. You will never let this moment be enough. The teachings point to something very different. They say, this right now is complete. Not because it's perfect, but because nothing is missing. You're not waiting to become sacred. You already are. The practice is not to become more spiritual. The practice is to stop believing you are apart from what you seek. Presence includes everything, even your confusion, even your need to improve. This is where rest begins, not the kind that comes at the end of a long journey, but the kind that was available the whole time. You don't need more steps. You need fewer stories, not less pain, but less resistance. The moment you stop trying to polish the mirror, you see that what you were trying to improve was already light itself. It didn't need to be brightened. It needed to be seen. When this becomes real in your experience, you live differently. You stop treating your practice like a ladder. You stop measuring yourself against invisible standards. You stop comparing your inner state to the way others seem to feel. You stop believing that discomfort means you've failed. You let the wave pass without asking it to leave faster. You let your humanity be part of your path. You might feel guilt for not trying harder, but even guilt becomes another story, another layer. You can see it rise, see it speak, and let it fall away. This doesn't make you careless. It makes you honest. You show up to your life not to fix it, but to live it, not to escape mistakes, but to meet them fully. Because peace is not the absence of problems. It's the absence of the belief that you need to be someone else first. You may start to feel an inner silence that's not achieved, but uncovered. It was buried under the noise of needing to be better. And now that noise is quiet. It may return. That's fine. But you know where stillness lives. You know what's true without needing to explain it. You stop interrupting presence with your ideas of who you should be. Even the desire to improve your spirituality can be seen clearly. You don't need to fight it. You don't need to indulge it. Just see it. Let it move. Let it fade. The deeper you look, the more you realize there's nothing to chase. Only this moment, this awareness, this breath, all of it enough. Letting go of improvement does not mean stagnation. It means allowing your unfolding to be led by life, not ego. Your transformation doesn't need your interference. Your awareness already knows what to do. You are not the sculptor of your awakening. You are the space in which awakening happens, gently, in its own rhythm. The more you trust this, the more your life becomes integrated. You eat not to perfect your body, but to nourish it. You rest not to optimize your energy, but because rest is part of love. You meditate not to silence the mind, but to listen to what's already here. You relate to others not to prove your growth, but to connect without filters. And when you forget, it's okay. That's part of the path too. Every time you notice the urge to improve, it becomes another invitation to return, to pause, to see through it. That's the practice. Returning. Not striving, not judging, just returning. To presence, to truth, to enoughness. You stop needing spiritual achievements. You stop checking your progress. You stop chasing states. And life, in its raw, ordinary beauty, begins to shine. The wind on your face, the sound of footsteps, the way sunlight touches the floor. These become sacred, not because you tried harder, but because you finally stopped trying. This is not resignation. It's surrender. Not defeat, but openness. You are no longer working against yourself, no longer dividing reality into worthy and unworthy. You've stepped out of the loop. You've put down the tools, and what remains is wholeness, untouched by effort. Let that be enough. Let the dust settle. Let the mirror reflect what it always has. Let this breath be the only thing you need right now. Not as an exercise, not as a step, but as the end of seeking. When striving stops and presence no longer needs proof, the silence that remains becomes more than a resting place. It becomes a doorway. Something subtle begins to stir just beneath the surface of awareness, something quieter than thoughts, gentler than emotion. It doesn't speak in words. It arrives before language. If you listen very closely, without effort, you'll begin to notice it, the first flicker of movement before the mind names it. This is where thoughts begin, not at their appearance, but at their formation. Before there is a sentence, before there is even an idea, there is this whisper, a tilt in attention, a soft leaning toward. This space, just before a thought arises, is not blank. It's alive. It's filled with a kind of potential, not yet shaped, not yet spoken. In Buddhist teachings, this is known as manasikara, mental attention. It's the moment when the mind starts to turn toward something, the split second where choice is made without words. You don't choose the thought, but you can witness the pull that precedes it. It's like a thread being drawn out of stillness, a thread that becomes meaning only after it emerges. But here, in this quiet, it's still free. This pre-thought whisper is always present, but it's rarely noticed. That's because the mind is so fast to fill space. It doesn't like to wait. It moves immediately from quiet into commentary. But if you begin to slow your attention, not forcefully but gently, you can start to feel the difference between awareness and concept. You begin to notice that awareness is already here, even when no thought has formed. There's no need to wait for language to know something is real. In this space, there's a kind of listening that doesn't rely on the ears. It's an internal attentiveness, an alertness without tension. You're not straining to catch the thought. You're resting in the openness before it arrives. This kind of listening reveals something profound, that the mind is not the source of knowing. It's a response. Awareness already knows, even before the mind moves. The thought is a translation, not a beginning. When you observe thoughts after they form, you're dealing with interpretation. You're already in the realm of belief, opinion, identity. But when you stay close to the edge, before the thought takes shape, you begin to see how the mind picks and chooses, how it leans toward certain sensations, how it grabs at particular feelings. You begin to sense the weight of preference before it turns into habit. And the more you rest here, the more clearly you see that nothing needs to be followed. Thoughts don't need to be stopped. They need to be seen early. When seen before they mature into stories, they lose their pull. They pass like birds across an open sky, noticed but not clung to. And from this place, you begin to feel a deeper stillness, one that includes motion without being disturbed by it. To stay with the pre-thought whisper is to become deeply intimate with your own mind, not the content, but the movement. You feel how attention shifts slightly before engagement. You notice how desire begins as a flicker, not a full emotion, how distraction starts with a tilt, not a decision, and instead of being pulled into the momentum, you remain where it all begins. This is not about control, it's about intimacy. Control stiffens attention, it creates resistance. But intimacy is soft. It listens. It doesn't push thought away, it simply meets it before it speaks. And in that meeting, the need to follow disappears. The thought may still arise, but now it's transparent. You see its shape, its flavor, its echo. And because you're not identified with it, you're not bound by it. Manasikara reveals how attention chooses. You begin to notice that what you look at becomes your world. If the attention moves toward worry, the mind fills with scenarios. If it turns toward judgment, a story of separation forms. But when attention stays grounded in awareness, those movements slow. They lose their urgency. You realize you don't have to go with them. You can stay. In that staying, you begin to feel thought not as words, but as energy, a ripple, a movement that hasn't yet found form. You feel how quickly the mind tries to convert that movement into language, and when you don't follow, the energy dissolves. This dissolving is not suppression, it's freedom. The thought that never becomes thought has no weight, no karma, no consequence. It returns to stillness without disturbance. This space before language is not empty. It's peaceful. It holds everything, quietly. You're not dull here. You're fully awake. But there is no hurry to define anything. You stop asking what you think. You stop trying to shape the moment with opinion. You listen with your whole being. And in that listening, the world appears new, fresh. Not because it changed, but because you stopped covering it with interpretation. As this deepens, your daily life begins to feel different. You respond slower, not because you're hesitant, but because you're no longer reacting to every mental impulse. You speak less, but your words carry more clarity. You think, but your thoughts feel lighter, more like tools than truths. There's space between stimulus and speech, between feeling and reaction. In that space, freedom lives. This kind of attention is not passive, it's precise, but it doesn't cling, it doesn't try to control, it simply sees. And that seeing is already enough. You don't have to add meaning, you don't have to explain what's arising, you just rest with it, let it move through, let it complete itself. Some moments will feel like nothing is happening. That's good. That's where the deepest shift occurs, in the quiet before the storm, in the silence before the song. You learn to trust this pause, to rest in it without searching for something else. And you begin to see that most suffering comes not from experience, but from the need to label experience. Even in meditation, you may notice how the mind tries to narrate your progress. This is deep. This is peaceful. This is working. But each of these thoughts pulls you away from the actual moment. You're no longer present. You're evaluating. And when you notice that, you can return, not by trying harder, but by listening again, to the space, to the whisper, to the movement that has no name yet. This listening is not a skill you develop. It's a sensitivity you uncover. It was always there, but drowned out by the noise of thinking. Now that the noise has softened, the signal becomes clear. It speaks quietly. It doesn't shout. That's why it's often missed. But when you stay with it, you begin to live from it. Not from concept, not from effort, but from a kind of still knowing that doesn't need to be described. This is where presence becomes natural, not a state you maintain, but a truth you stop interrupting. You don't have to chase stillness. You don't have to create peace. You only have to notice where thought begins and choose not to follow. In that choice, not made with the mind but felt in the body, you return, again and again. Thoughts will come. That's not a failure. They're not the enemy. They're just echoes of attention. The more you rest before the echo, the less you get pulled into the sound. You hear it. You feel it. But you're not it. And slowly, the identity built on thoughts begins to loosen. Not because you fought it, but because you listened before it took shape. Now your life becomes less about fixing and more about seeing, less about managing and more about meeting. The need to know what's next fades. The anxiety to be certain fades, because you've seen where it all begins, and it doesn't need control, it only needs awareness. And now you live from this awareness, not as a technique, but as the most natural way to be. Because you're no longer building yourself out of thoughts. You're resting in the silence they come from. You're living from the place where nothing is missing, where every word begins as a whisper, where every moment is born from stillness. As attention becomes subtle and the mind is seen before it speaks, a new kind of stillness begins to reveal itself, not through adding more awareness, but through withdrawing from the structures that keep awareness bound. It is not resistance. It is not escape. It is the quiet choice to not engage with the noise, not from fear, not from avoidance, but from clarity. This is not collapse or shutdown. This is a conscious stepping back from the story, a still, steady refusal to participate in the habitual loops that create suffering. Not because you reject life, but because you see that presence does not depend on commentary. There is a place inside you that is already untouched by the world's definitions. It is not confused by opinion or image. It doesn't need to explain itself or justify its silence. This place is not distant. It is simply free from the pull of narrative, and sometimes the path to that freedom requires stepping away from the current of interpretation altogether, not to run, but to remain unmoved, to stop weaving a self out of thoughts, to disengage without dissociating. This form of mindful dissociation is not disconnection from reality. It is a precise and deliberate unhooking from the mind's story about reality. It is what some Zen masters pointed to with impossible koans. It is the sudden crack in the logic of the ego, where nothing makes sense and everything becomes clear. When the mind is no longer fed its usual roles, something deeper can be heard. A stillness not made of understanding, but of absence. To practice this, you don't leave the moment. You leave the interpretation. The mind wants to name, to react, to solve. But here you remain. You hear the voice, but you do not respond. You see the image, but you do not chase it. You allow things to be unfinished, unsorted, unexplained, and in that permission, clarity begins to grow. Not clarity of answers, but clarity of presence. a groundedness that does not depend on conclusions. When you intentionally disengage, you discover how much of your identity depends on engagement. The mind wants to be someone in every moment, to win, to defend, to argue, to compare. But when you no longer play that game, the self begins to lose its tension. You are not gone, you are simply not performing. And in that non-performance, you meet something more stable than identity. You meet the silence that watches all roles come and go. This is not spiritual bypassing. It's not pretending nothing matters. It's seeing deeply that what matters cannot be reduced to mental commentary. The truth of your being is not found in the story of your being. And to rest in that truth, you sometimes must pull attention away from everything that claims to be you. The voice in the head, the pull of emotion, the echo of memory. You see it all, and you do not cling. This kind of disengagement can feel radical at first. The mind will resist. It will say you are losing yourself, falling behind, giving up. But what you're giving up is only the strain of identification, the false tension of needing to be a thought. And as you let go, something ancient begins to settle. The nervous system slows, the chest softens, the breath deepens, not because you tried, but because you stopped holding the image. In this space, effort fades. You stop trying to be aware. You stop trying to meditate. You stop trying to be good at presence. You simply stop doing anything that reinforces the self-concept. And in that non-doing, presence reveals itself, not as something achieved, but as something uncovered. It was always here, beneath the layers of narrative you thought you needed. This practice does not deny the world. It embraces it without being owned by it. You still hear the sounds, feel the sensations, witness the thoughts. But you are no longer inside the commentary. You are no longer trapped in reaction. You rest in the space around it all, not aloof, not numb, simply whole, not pulled into the storm because the storm no longer feels like you. Sometimes this feels like emptiness, but not in a negative way. It is empty of compulsion, empty of role-playing, empty of the need to fix, and from this emptiness comes peace, not silence that avoids, but silence that contains, a fullness that doesn't need drama, a presence that doesn't need identity. There is a kind of seeing here that goes beyond logic. You don't understand what's happening with the mind. You simply notice that you are no longer inside the stream. You are the riverbank, watching, present, not moved. This is not detachment. This is true connection. Connection not through grasping, but through being. And in this being, life becomes simpler. You walk without telling yourself how to walk. You breathe without managing the breath. You speak when needed, but the words feel less personal, less heavy. You're no longer trying to say something about yourself. You're just responding to what's real. This withdrawal is gentle. You don't pull away from the world. You stop feeding the filter. You stop narrating. You stop judging. You stop shaping every moment into a version of self. And in that stopping, life flows more clearly. Not louder, not brighter, just real, uncolored by expectation. You begin to see how much of your past identity was a performance, how much effort went into appearing a certain way, even to yourself. And now, None of that is needed. The mind still offers roles, scripts, masks, but you don't put them on. You don't argue with them either. You let them pass, because you've tasted what lies beyond, the unshaped presence that needs no script. There is a deep compassion in this practice, not emotional drama, but spacious kindness. You see others wrapped in their stories, chasing themselves. You no longer need to change them. You meet them where they are because you've stopped trying to be somewhere else. And in this meeting, real connection happens, not between egos, but between beings. Even action becomes different. You act when it's time, but without tension, without the weight of proving something. You do not withdraw forever. You simply choose when to engage and from what level of being. You no longer react from the surface. You respond from depth. And this response carries a kind of power, not control, but alignment. It feels right, not because it's planned, but because it's real. The old patterns may still arise. That's natural, but you see them sooner. You notice the first pull into narrative, and you pause. You do not enter. You rest, not above the mind, not against it, just beside it, watching, letting it tire itself out, letting the thoughts finish themselves. You do nothing to stop them, and they pass, like wind. This stillness is not a fixed state. It's a resting place. You can return to it any time. When things get loud, when confusion builds, when the world demands reaction, you know now that you can step back, not to escape, but to see, not to withdraw forever, but to remember what's true. And what's true is simple. You are not the one inside the noise. You are the one who can hear it without becoming it. You are the one who can stop feeding the self-image. You are the one who can rest in presence without needing a reason. So now, rest again. Let the world move. Let the story speak. Let it all pass by. You're not missing anything. You're not falling behind. You are simply not performing anymore. And in that non-performance, the most natural peace arises, effortless, clear, true. As you rest in the quiet that comes from no longer performing, no longer believing the thoughts that arise, a deeper sensitivity begins to return. It's not mental. It doesn't come through concepts. It moves through the body, through contact, through sensation. Attention no longer floats above experience. It comes back down, into form, into the present, not as a thought about presence, but as presence itself, felt directly through the skin, the breath, the nerves. This is not awareness as an idea. This is awareness grounded in the living field of texture. The body becomes the entry point, not because it's a separate thing to observe, but because it is part of awareness itself. When all the narratives fall away, sensation remains. The coolness of air on the cheek, the faint pressure of clothing, the weight of the body resting on the ground. These are not distractions, they are doorways. Each sensation points to what is happening right now, without a filter, without needing to be understood. You do not have to do anything to access this, only notice. And in noticing, the idea of time begins to fade. Past and future lose their weight. There is only this breath, this pulse, this contact. Touch is the most immediate way to return to the moment. It's always available. You cannot touch in the future. You cannot feel something yesterday. You can only feel what is now. That's why it's powerful, because it cannot be postponed. The texture of this moment is not conceptual. It cannot be carried by memory. It must be entered directly. And when you do, awareness stops floating above experience. It lands. In this landing, you begin to discover the body not as an object, but as a living field. You notice the warmth in your hands, the tingling in your feet, the slow rhythm of the breath as it moves in and out. You don't need to describe it. You don't need to fix it. You only stay with it, letting awareness spread, not in a rigid scan, but like water soaking into every pore. This is not control, it's intimacy. The more you stay, the more detail you feel. The textures become finer, subtler. What once felt like a single sensation reveals layers. The weight of the body has weight within it. The air has coolness that changes across your skin. Even stillness is filled with vibration. You don't need to search for meaning. You don't need to name anything. You let it arise and fade, just as it is. This is samadhi, not concentration in the narrow sense, but absorption without force. You are not holding your focus. You are resting in contact. The mind does not need to shrink its field. It opens through attention that is steady but relaxed. You are not observing the body from a distance. You are awareness, merged with the field of sensation. There is no watcher. There is only the texture of now. As this deepens, your identity begins to soften again. You are not inside the body. You are not outside it. You are the knowing of what is touched, what is pressed, what is tingling, not in a mystical way, but in the most real and physical way possible. Presence is not apart from the senses. It is most alive within them when you stop filtering them through thought. You begin to understand that sensation does not need commentary. The pressure of your legs against the chair does not need to be labeled. The rise and fall of your belly does not require an opinion. The moment you stop adding thought, sensation becomes a teacher. It shows you what real presence feels like, raw, open, detailed, always changing. You don't have to chase stillness. It's in the feeling of each breath, each shift, each pause. Some sensations will feel pleasant, others uncomfortable. Both are equal. Both are part of this field. You do not cling to one or avoid the other. You stay with what arises without choosing. This is the discipline of embodiment, not the discipline of control, but the discipline of allowing. Allowing the full range of tactile experience without needing to escape. Over time, this transforms how you relate to your physical form. You no longer treat the body as a problem to fix or an identity to uphold. It becomes your anchor, your ground, your guide into what is most real. When thought pulls you away, you return, not by thinking differently, but by feeling directly. You place attention in your hands, your feet, your breath, and the story begins to dissolve. This doesn't mean you ignore pain. It means you meet it without adding suffering. You feel tension, but you don't resist it. You feel warmth, but you don't grasp it. Everything is met as sensation, not as a statement about who you are. The body becomes transparent, not invisible, but open. There is sensation, but no claimer. Movement, but no mover. Just this unfolding. Even in moments of emotional heaviness, the tactile field remains. Grief has a temperature. Anxiety has a texture. Joy has a rhythm. You feel it in your throat, your chest, your belly. By staying with sensation, you meet the emotion at its root, not through stories about why it's there, but through the simple truth of how it feels. And as you rest with it, it changes. It moves. It teaches. Touch also connects you to the world without separation. The ground you walk on, the fabric you wear, the hands you hold, all become part of the same field. You no longer feel alone in your body. You feel how sensation links everything. You begin to understand connection not as an idea, but as direct contact. You are not apart. You are part of a larger presence, and the body is how you remember. As you explore this more deeply, the need for external stimulation fades. You don't need louder experiences. You start finding detail in the smallest sensations, the coolness of an inhale, the slight shift of balance in your spine, the changing pressure in your fingertips. The ordinary becomes profound, not because it changes, but because you are finally here to feel it. And as you continue, something quieter appears, a gentle background hum, a vibration that doesn't belong to any single point, but that flows through the entire body. It isn't dramatic. It doesn't demand attention. But it becomes more obvious the more you rest. It's a living silence, not empty, but filled with presence. It holds everything. The breath, the tingles, the aches, the warmth. This vibration is not something to chase. It's not a special state. It's what happens when the body is allowed to be exactly as it is. When you stop looking for something better. When you stop managing sensation and let it reveal itself. You don't hold it. You let it hold you. You rest into it like gravity. And awareness settles, not on top of the body, but within it. From here, life becomes less mental and more immediate. You respond to the world from what you feel, not from what you assume. You speak from groundedness. You act from contact. You're not acting out thoughts. You're living from sensation. And it carries a kind of truth that thought cannot produce. Touch teaches you that awareness is not elsewhere. It's not a concept to understand. It's in the direct experience of what is. It's the feeling of your breath brushing against your nostrils, the gentle pulsing behind your eyes, the shifting weight in your feet. It's here, and it's now, and it never needed words to exist. So you stay, not because it's a rule, because it's natural, because each time you return to sensation, you remember what the mind forgets, that life is not an idea. It's felt, and in feeling, you return not just to your body, but to presence itself, complete, immediate, whole. As you rest more deeply in sensation, the need for stories fades. Attention settles into the immediacy of what is felt, what is here. You are no longer building identity out of thoughts. There's less pressure to understand, less need to remember. You begin to sense a deeper kind of freedom, the kind that doesn't come from knowing more, but from holding less. And this leads to a truth few are ready to face. The real weight we carry is not just the past itself, but our constant remembering of it. The memory of who we've been becomes a prison for who we are now. Letting go is not just about the future. It's about stepping out of the storyline of the self. The mind returns to memory often, not because it needs to, but because it doesn't know how to stop. It reviews, repeats, replays. It clings to the familiar voice that says, "This is what happened. This is what you are. This is your role." But none of that is happening now. The moment you return to memory, you are no longer in presence. You've traded reality for narrative, and no matter how powerful or painful the story is, it separates you from the moment that's actually happening. Memory isn't the enemy. It serves its place in function, learning, survival, continuity. But identity built on memory is unstable. It relies on something that no longer exists. You were shaped by events, but you are not those events. You are what remains when memory is not being replayed. This realization can feel disorienting at first, because so much of our identity is held together by personal history. But the deeper truth is liberating. You are not obligated to remember in order to be whole. The practice of conscious forgetting is not about erasing the past. It's about releasing the grip it has on perception. You learn to see the moment without adding context. You begin to notice how quickly the mind reaches back to compare, to justify, to reinforce who it thinks you are. But you are under no obligation to follow. You can let the memory pass like any other thought. You can remain with the breath, with the body, with what is arising now. This is not repression. It's clarity. You're not pushing memory away. You're recognizing that memory is only real when it's remembered. And even then, it's an interpretation, shaped by mood, colored by bias. You begin to see how unreliable memory is, how it alters each time it's recalled. You realize that the story you keep telling yourself isn't a truth, it's a habit. And you don't have to keep repeating it. There's great peace in not knowing who you are supposed to be. There's freedom in letting go of the autobiography. Not permanently, not dramatically, but moment by moment. You don't have to carry your past into every interaction. You don't have to bring yesterday's wounds into today's silence. Each moment becomes cleaner, less layered. You hear words as they are spoken, not through the filter of old conversations. You meet people as they are now, not through the lens of what they used to mean. This is not forgetfulness in the traditional sense. This is deliberate release. You train the mind to stop referencing what is no longer here. You let the image of yourself fade. You stop refreshing the archive. What remains is stillness, not empty, but open. You are not erasing the past. You are stepping out of its shadow. When this deepens, even strong memories begin to lose their emotional charge. They still arise, but they don't pull. They don't define the present. The event happened, but the identification weakens. You stop building your current sense of self from old stories. You don't need to remember being hurt in order to heal. You don't need to remember being praised in order to feel worthy. The moment you let the memory go, presence becomes real again. Memory often keeps you in roles. It tells you who you were, and by extension, who you must continue to be. But this moment is not interested in who you were. It only asks for who you are now. And now is always new. Now does not repeat. The more you stay in now, the less pressure you feel to perform your past, the less trapped you feel by what others think they know about you. You may notice how much energy goes into maintaining your history, the way you remember who you were in front of certain people, the way you hold on to mistakes, the way you replay conversations. This creates a background tension, a constant internal maintenance, and when you stop feeding that loop, energy returns. not just physical, but mental space. You begin to think more clearly, not because you know more, but because you're no longer weighed down by what isn't needed. Even positive memories can be binding. They create comparison. They shape expectation. You start chasing a feeling that belonged to another time, and that chase pulls you out of the richness of what's happening now. You miss the subtle beauty in front of you because you're trying to recreate a different one. Presence is not a reproduction. It is the raw aliveness of this exact moment, and that aliveness is enough. Letting go of memory does not mean letting go of care. You still remember how to cook, how to speak, how to walk. What you're letting go of is the narrative built on personal history, the imagined continuity that keeps you locked in identity, the belief that who you were must define who you are. The truth is, you are never the same person twice, and when you stop pretending otherwise, peace has room to breathe. You begin to live with a lighter touch. You don't need to explain yourself as much. You don't need to be consistent with your past. You're not trapped in roles, not stuck in patterns. You stop saying, "This is just how I am." You let yourself be new because you are. Every breath is different. Every thought arises in fresh conditions. The mind wants to pretend it knows who you are, but presence always disagrees. It says, "This is what you are now, nothing else." Conscious forgetting is also an act of forgiveness. You stop dragging old wounds into new spaces. You stop rehearsing what went wrong. You stop using memory as a weapon against your own peace. You can feel the past, but you don't have to keep building from it. You can allow the scar without reliving the injury. You stop telling yourself the same painful story and finally allow it to dissolve. This dissolving is not instant. It's gentle. You let memories come without welcoming them in. You stop feeding them attention. You see them rise, and you choose not to engage. Over time, their grip weakens, not because you've rejected them, but because you've stopped believing they're useful. What is useful is the awareness that doesn't change, the stillness that doesn't carry anything, the clarity that only comes when you are no longer filtered through who you used to be. You start to notice how often conversations are driven by shared memory. People connect by repeating stories, but sometimes the most intimate thing you can offer is silence. Not silence that withdraws, but silence that listens without needing context. You don't need to know someone's past to feel their presence. You don't need to share a history to feel close. You just need to meet them now as they are. And when you meet yourself this way, you stop needing to justify your existence. You stop explaining your habits. You stop defending your choices. You meet what arises inside you as if for the first time, not with judgment, but with openness. You stop saying, "This again," and start saying, "This now." The past becomes background noise, not because it's gone, but because it's no longer in charge. There is humility in this. You stop thinking you know yourself. You stop predicting your reactions. You stop assuming what you'll feel. Instead, you let each moment teach you. You let each sensation speak for itself. You let each breath arrive clean. And from this humility comes peace. Not because life becomes easier, but because you're no longer carrying an identity through it. Letting go of memory doesn't mean forgetting who your family is or how to function in the world. It means stopping the need to be someone based on what has happened. You stop building yourself out of moments that no longer exist. and you start trusting the moment that does. So when a memory arises, let it. But don't turn it into identity. Don't use it to shrink the moment. Let it pass like wind through open space. You are not the past. You are the space in which the past is seen. And that space is always new, always open, always free. As you stop living inside memory, something unexpected begins to appear. In the space left behind, old emotions surface. Not because you failed, but because they were always waiting beneath the noise. And now, with fewer stories in the way, you begin to feel what was once too difficult to feel. What you left behind does not disappear. It waits, and what waits is not your enemy. It's the part of you that still longs to be seen without fear, without rejection, without shame. The path forward is not to avoid it, but to meet it with the same presence you've given everything else. The parts of you that remain unloved do not block your peace. They are the doorway to it. The human mind naturally hides what it fears others will not accept. We push away impulses, traits, emotions, and desires that don't fit the version of ourselves we've worked to maintain. We suppress anger and call it patience. We deny fear and call it confidence. We avoid sadness and call it strength. But underneath those masks, something stays unresolved. It doesn't vanish. It shows up in quiet discomfort, in tension that won't go away, in behavior we can't explain. This is the shadow, not evil, not dangerous, but the disowned parts of you still asking to be included. In Buddhist insight practice, vipassana means clear seeing. It is not analysis. It is not interpretation. It is meeting what arises with full awareness. No filter, no correction. And when turned inward, this practice reveals not just the surface habits of the mind, but the deeper layers, the traits you hide, the stories you resist, the pain you never gave permission to speak. The goal is not to fix the shadow, but to see it fully, to understand that it has always belonged. There is no true presence while exclusion remains. You cannot be fully here while part of you is being silenced. Peace does not come from purity. It comes from wholeness, and wholeness includes contradiction. The peaceful person also has rage. The kind person also has cruelty. The spiritual person also carries doubt. None of this is failure. It is the full range of the human experience, and insight practice helps you stop dividing yourself. You begin to notice how quickly the mind categorizes. This is acceptable. That is not. This can be seen. That must be hidden. But awareness does not judge. It does not label traits as good or bad. It does not divide the mind into parts worth keeping and parts worth exiling. When you rest in awareness, all parts are equal, and the ones you've rejected begin to relax, not because they are being controlled, but because they are being included. The shadow doesn't need to be healed before it can be seen. It needs to be seen before it can be healed. And seeing it doesn't mean liking it. It means allowing it. Without commentary, without justification. You let it show itself, ugly, loud, scared, confused, and you do not flinch. You let the discomfort rise and fall without making it personal. You stop turning away. You stay. This staying is what creates integration, not through effort, but through recognition. You start to see how the trait you avoided had wisdom hidden inside it. Your anger contained your boundaries. Your sadness held your honesty. Your fear carried your longing for safety. Nothing inside you was ever random. Everything served a purpose, but it became distorted when denied. Now, as you meet it, the distortion begins to soften. This is the deeper work of presence, not just resting in awareness, but expanding that awareness to include what was once left out. You stop aiming to be a version of yourself. You stop performing enlightenment. You let go of the idea that awakening requires you to be pleasant, calm, or pure. The awakened mind is not clean, it is inclusive. It allows everything without becoming any of it. Even in meditation, this matters. You sit and the breath is calm, but a sudden irritation rises. Before you would label it a distraction, now you welcome it. You feel it in the body. You notice the story it brings. You let it be felt, not fixed. You let it complete its shape without suppressing it. And by doing so, you learn that presence isn't fragile. It can hold discomfort. It can stay with chaos. It doesn't need the mind to be quiet. It only needs honesty. This honesty begins to reach every part of your life. You stop needing to explain yourself so carefully. You stop polishing your behavior to appear spiritual. You stop fearing your own contradictions. You begin to speak from depth, not role. You tell the truth more easily. You apologize without shame. You feel compassion not because you're supposed to, but because you're no longer protecting your image. The shadow becomes less threatening. It starts to feel like a younger version of you, still clinging to old fears. And instead of fighting it, you hold it. You say yes to its presence, not to indulge it, but to free it. The parts of you that were stuck begin to move. The emotions that were frozen begin to thaw. The inner division that caused so much quiet suffering starts to mend. In relationships, this changes everything. You become less reactive, not because you suppress reaction, but because you know where it's coming from. You feel the sting of judgment, and instead of retaliating, you feel the old wound underneath. You don't need the other person to change. You see that this moment is an invitation to integrate, and you respond from presence, not pattern. The peace that comes from this is not soft, it is solid. You are no longer at war with yourself. You stop needing to be good. You stop fearing being bad. You live from truth, not from ideal. And this truth includes all of you, not just the light, but the shadow it casts. You stop seeking safety in perfection. You find it in wholeness. Even your spiritual path shifts. You stop looking for states. You stop chasing purity. You understand that wisdom is not always clean, that real love is messy, that growth includes failure. The practice becomes deeper, more human, more complete. You stop comparing your journey to others because you realize you're not on their path, you're on yours, and yours includes everything that has ever risen inside you. You begin to trust what arises, not because it's always pleasant, but because it's always honest. You no longer need to push away what feels uncomfortable. You meet it with the same stillness you've offered your breath. You give it space, and in that space, transformation happens, not through control, but through allowing. This allowing becomes your strength. You are no longer afraid of what you feel. You are no longer ashamed of your depth. You carry both shadow and light without needing to balance them. They balance themselves when you stop interfering. You are not the parts. You are the presence that sees the whole. And the more you live from that whole, the more others feel safe around you. Because you are no longer performing. You are real. Your presence tells the truth. It doesn't pretend. And in that truth, others feel permission to be whole too. You become a mirror, not of perfection, but of permission. So now, return again, not to silence, but to inclusion. Let what rises be seen. Let what hurts be held. Let what was rejected be welcomed. You are not trying to change it. You are only making room for it to exist. Because in presence, everything belongs. As the shadow softens and the rejected parts begin to feel safe in awareness, something shifts again. Not a grand revelation, not a moment of triumph. Something quieter, less visible, more intimate. You start noticing that the transformation doesn't always look like transformation. There's no dramatic sign, no fireworks, no finish line. The more you see clearly, the more ordinary everything becomes. And that's not a disappointment. That's the point. Peace wasn't hidden in some distant future. It was waiting in the moment you kept walking past. The belief that awakening must feel extraordinary is one of the most persistent obstacles on the path. We expect something luminous, overwhelming, unmistakable. We search for peak experiences, thinking they prove we've arrived, but peak experiences, by nature, end. They pass, just like every other feeling, and if you measure your growth by them, you'll always feel like you've lost something. True clarity doesn't spike, it settles. The mind craves contrast. It wants to label certain moments as more important, more spiritual, more alive. But presence doesn't choose favorites. It's not louder on a mountaintop than in your kitchen. The sacred isn't more available during a retreat than while brushing your teeth. What changes is not the moment. It's your willingness to stop expecting more from it. The ordinary has always been complete. It just wasn't dramatic enough to keep your attention. This is tathata, suchness. The direct, unfiltered reality of things as they are, without decoration, without comparison. A bowl on a table, the warmth of water on your hands, the rhythm of walking across a floor. There is no enlightenment to find in these moments because they are already whole. The search itself is the distraction. When the need for significance dissolves, what remains is presence. Pure, undivided, not because it feels special, but because it doesn't need to. Letting go of the idea of specialness doesn't mean losing depth. It means finding a deeper kind of beauty, the kind that doesn't need to impress you. The mind might say, this is just a chair, just a breath, just a day like any other. But awareness doesn't speak like that. It doesn't compare. It doesn't rank. It sees the fullness of the moment without adding expectation. And that seeing is what makes it free. The pursuit of intensity is often the pursuit of distraction. We believe that if something doesn't move us deeply, it isn't worth our presence. But the ability to feel deeply isn't limited to big moments. It becomes steady when you stop chasing and start receiving. You stop needing reality to impress you, and you begin to trust that it's enough, even when it's quiet, even when it's dull. The ordinary becomes clear when you stop looking for something else. You stop waiting for breakthroughs. You stop comparing your life to the lives of others. You stop thinking enlightenment is a mood. It's not an emotion. It's the absence of resistance. And that absence is available now, in the breath, in the pause between thoughts, in the familiar gestures you usually overlook. Some of the most powerful moments are the ones you never notice. not because you missed them, but because they didn't ask to be noticed. They weren't loud, they weren't ecstatic. They were simple, and in that simplicity, they were free. The world doesn't need to change for you to awaken. You only need to stop leaving the moment you're in. This doesn't mean rejecting wonder. It means no longer needing wonder to feel whole. You still notice beauty. You still feel awe. But you don't chase those feelings. You let them come and go like everything else. You stop organizing your practice around trying to feel something extraordinary. You start meeting what's here exactly as it is, and that's where the real shift happens. Peace deepens when you stop evaluating your experience, when you stop asking if it's meaningful, when you stop waiting for the inner world to mirror your ideas about awakening. You brush your teeth, you drink water, you tie your shoes. These are not interruptions to the path. They are the path. You stop skipping over them. You stop reaching for the next thing. You just remain. The need for peak moments is a form of doubt. It says, this can't be it. This isn't enough. But who decided that presence has to feel a certain way? That transformation must be intense? The deeper truth is, the more awake you are, the less you need experience to entertain you, because experience no longer defines you. It's just what's happening. This is why advanced practice often looks like nothing. A person sitting, breathing, washing dishes. But inside, there is no separation, no push and pull, no one waiting for something better. Just awareness, meeting the world as it is. Not because it's become boring, but because nothing needs to be added. The ordinary has revealed its depth. When you live like this, you begin to meet life differently. You stop hunting for meaning. You stop asking every situation to give you something. You let the moment be what it is, and you stop measuring its value by how it feels. You notice the tiny movements, your hand reaching for a cup, your foot stepping off the curb, your head turning toward a sound. Each one becomes a complete experience. You are not empty, you are not flat, you are simply no longer performing. You are no longer dramatizing your life to make it seem interesting. You are at peace with the smallness of things, and in that smallness you find the vastness that was missing when you were chasing more. Even in difficulty, this truth remains. You face a challenge, and you don't need it to be a lesson. You don't need to extract wisdom. You simply meet it, moment by moment, without layering it with spiritual meaning. Presence is not found by making life sacred. Presence reveals that life already is. This doesn't remove your personality, it refines your attention. You still laugh, cry, create, respond, but you do so without needing the moment to be a certain way. You don't resist boredom. You don't panic in quiet. You meet routine with the same attention you once reserved for special occasions. Because now you know there are no special occasions. There is only now, appearing in infinite forms. And when you live this way, gratitude arises naturally, not as a practice, but as a result. You don't have to think of what you're thankful for. You feel it in the ordinariness itself. The way the light comes through the window, the sound of footsteps in another room, the smell of warm food. Nothing needs to change. Everything is already included. This is the end of spiritual ambition, the end of trying to achieve presence through elevated states. You realize those moments were never the point. They came and went, like all things. What matters is not how deep something feels. What matters is whether you stayed with it. whether you let it be what it was. Suchness is not something to reach, it is what remains when reaching stops. You don't need to strain to feel it. You only need to stop waiting for it to feel different. The path becomes ordinary, and in doing so, becomes complete. You're not missing anything. You're not doing it wrong. The clarity you seek is already in the next moment you're willing to meet without judgment. When the need for extraordinary moments dissolves and the ordinary reveals itself as complete, something even quieter begins to surface. A stillness not defined by peace, joy, or insight. A stillness that is not something at all. It doesn't carry emotion. It doesn't announce its arrival. It doesn't give you anything to hold on to. It simply appears when there is nothing left to reach for, not through effort, but through a complete pause of becoming. You don't notice it with the mind. You recognize it because, in that instant, the mind is not present. What remains is not an experience, but the space where experience stops. This is cessation, not symbolic, not abstract, but directly lived, even for a flicker, when all activity falls away. Cessation, in Buddhist teaching, is the end of fabrication, the end of perception, the end of even awareness as it's normally known. But in daily life, this isn't something you create. It happens on its own, in brief gaps that the mind usually misses. A pause in thought where no new thought rushes in. A split second when identity doesn't reassert itself. You're walking, and suddenly the world is just texture, no self involved. You're hearing a sound, and for a moment, there's no listener, just the sound itself. It's not dramatic. It's not even felt. It's known by its absence. The ordinary moment is filled with these openings, but they're easy to overlook because they don't have a story. They don't leave an impression. They don't feed memory. They vanish as soon as they happen. And yet, the more still you become, the more often you sense their presence, not because you grasp them, but because you stop interfering. You begin to taste what it's like when the machinery of experience turns off for a breath. And that taste is unlike any other. It's not peace as a quality, it's peace as the complete end of grasping. These glimpses of cessation don't happen because you add something to the moment. They arise because something unneeded falls away. Tension releases. Control stops. The self-concept goes offline. You don't disappear. You were never something fixed to begin with. What disappears is the struggle to be someone. And in that vanishing, there's no excitement. Just the absence of effort. No longer reaching. No longer resisting. Just stillness, free of content. Trying to find cessation is the surest way to miss it. It cannot be sought. It cannot be practiced in the usual sense, but it can be noticed when it happens naturally. In the middle of washing your hands, a shift. In the space between breaths, a fading. You are not the one who sees it. You are not there at all. The seeing remains, but the seer is gone, only for a moment. But in that moment, freedom reveals itself in its most naked form. This is not the cessation of death or blankness. It's the cessation of building. For just one beat, nothing is being constructed. Not a self, not a thought, not even awareness of being aware. The entire framework pauses. And what remains is not a thing. It's not describable. But when the mind returns, it knows something happened, not as an event, but as an unmaking. In formal meditation, practitioners might touch this state after deep absorption. But in everyday life, it flickers when you stop insisting that the moment must mean something. When you stop labeling. When attention is so soft, it doesn't land anywhere. You might be looking at a tree, and suddenly there's no one behind the eyes. Just openness, no commentary, no owner. Then the mind returns and the self reappears. But the imprint of absence remains. What makes these moments significant is not their duration. It's their quality. They are not restful in a conventional sense. They are silent in a way that erases the one who wants to rest. They don't comfort. They erase the need for comfort. They don't explain. They render all explanation irrelevant. When the world reboots afterward, it often feels like a shift occurred, even if no one can say what shifted. You don't train for cessation by striving. You train by subtracting, by learning to stay with what is without adding layers. You practice by being willing to let experience fall away, by loosening the habit of constant engagement, by not grasping for continuity. It's in the loosening that space appears. In the space, the possibility of cessation opens. This isn't escape. It's intimacy without self-reference. It's not disconnection. It's the end of mental commentary. What disappears is not the world. It's the observer. Not forever, just briefly. Long enough to show you that being someone was never required for the moment to happen. The present does not need your presence in the way you think. It continues with or without your mental stamp on it. Fear can arise when approaching this threshold. The mind senses it has nothing to hold on to, and it resists. It clings harder. It tries to label what's happening. But if you allow the fear to come and go without response, the gap returns. It is not dangerous. It is not empty. It is the release of all effort, including the effort to know. Some might say this is too subtle to matter, but what could be more meaningful than the place where clinging ends? Not as a belief, as a lived pause. No matter how short, that pause reveals something deeper than any insight, that suffering stops not through solving, but through ending the one who struggles. Not through answers, but through silence untouched by questions. Daily life gives endless opportunities for this, folding clothes, walking in the hallway, waiting at a stoplight. The mind doesn't expect insight in these moments. That's why they are perfect. You are relaxed, not chasing, not analyzing. The usual narrative fades. In that openness, perception becomes transparent. You're there, but not as someone. Just awareness, without edge, without claim. This is not disassociation. You are not detached from the world. You are not removed. You are fully here, but the frame is gone. The mental scaffolding that usually defines you has dropped. And what's left is not numbness. It's clarity without observer. Not seeing as I see, but seeing as itself. Sometimes in conversation, this may happen. The words continue, but for a moment, there's no you speaking. Just voice, just sound, just connection. You come back to identity afterward, but you remember the gap. Not as something you caused, but as something you allowed. This is the subtle art of meeting the world without needing to be separate from it. Even breath can lead here, not as a technique, but as a natural pause. When the inhale ends and the exhale hasn't begun. a gap, or when listening and the sound stops, another gap. These moments of stillness are everywhere. You only have to stop filling them. Let the space stay space. Let the mind stop insisting on content. You won't be able to hold these moments. You won't be able to describe them clearly. That's how you know they're real. They don't feed the ego. They don't build a story. They are gone before they can be claimed. And yet their absence is nourishing. Their silence lingers. Their stillness leaves a trace, not of something gained, but of something no longer needed. Over time, these pauses become more familiar, not more frequent by effort, but by openness. You stop interrupting. You stop clinging to what comes next. You let now be incomplete. You stop needing experience to prove itself. You allow perception to fall away when it wants to, and in doing so, you begin to flirt with a peace that requires nothing from you, not even your presence. This is not an advanced state. It is the most natural state. You've already touched it many times. You just didn't recognize it because there was no one there to recognize. But now you know what to notice, or rather, you know how to stop interfering with what notices on its own. And from this non-interference, the deepest kind of ease begins to grow. So continue, not forward, but inward, not by doing, but by pausing. Let the next moment appear. Let it fade. Let the space between things teach you. Let the end of knowing reveal the beginning of freedom. As the moments of cessation flicker in and out of perception, something subtle remains, a trace, a residue, a faint presence of what is no longer here. It's not the thing itself, but the space it left behind. The mind is conditioned to focus on what's next, to fill every gap, to move forward. But if you stay, if you don't rush to replace what just vanished, a new kind of awareness opens. You begin to feel the aftertaste, not as memory, not as imagination, but as the echo that remains when a sound is gone, when an experience has dissolved, when the moment has passed, and yet something of it still lives, barely there, barely felt. And it is in this barely that presence grows deeper. The ordinary mind grabs at what is loud, immediate, obvious. It wants definition. It wants content. But there is a different kind of clarity that only arises when you stop looking at the front of experience and start resting in what follows. The end of a sound, the fading of warmth, the soft decay of sensation. These are not empty. They hold a quality of depth that cannot be found in the center of activity. They are like the scent that lingers after a flower is gone. Not the form, not the object, but the impression it leaves behind. This impression is not emotional residue. It is the subtlest layer of presence. What remains when you don't chase the next thing. It's where time loosens and silence becomes textured. To rest here is not to dwell in the past. It is to meet the living present at the threshold where form has just ended. You are not remembering. You are not clinging. You are staying in the wake of something, letting awareness settle into the stillness that follows movement. These lingering impressions appear everywhere. After a conversation ends, before another begins. When a breeze passes and your skin still feels its trace. After a thought dissolves and there's a moment before the next arises. Most people miss these because they fill them with commentary. But if you simply remain quiet, soft, available, you begin to feel the richness of what's gone. Not because it stayed, but because you did. This is a form of meditation that isn't about breath or object. It's about non-interference. You don't focus, you don't push, you just stop turning away. When something ends, you stay. When the sound fades, you don't rush to label the silence. When the feeling passes, you don't reach for another. You let the space hold itself. And in doing so, you begin to sense that emptiness is not lack. It is presence without form. The power of this practice is in its gentleness. It doesn't lead to insight in the traditional way. It doesn't produce answers or realizations. It reveals what is often overlooked, that the deepest stillness doesn't come from achieving quiet, but from being unafraid to remain with what no longer asserts itself. Most of the time, we rush away from endings. We distract ourselves. But what if the most profound kind of awareness lives in what no longer needs your attention? There is no technique here, only patience, only the willingness to pause, not to evaluate or extract meaning, but to feel the invisible thread that connects you to presence without content. You begin to sense how awareness continues even when the object of awareness is gone. You're not focused on anything, yet something remains clear. This clarity is not directed. It is ambient. It is open. It rests in the atmosphere of what was. Practicing this in daily life changes how you experience endings. The end of a meal is no longer something to rush through. The last note of a song becomes part of your listening. The final word of a sentence doesn't mean you move on. You stay, not out of nostalgia, but out of reverence for the space that just opened. You begin to meet stillness where most people find emptiness. You begin to let the end be the teacher rather than the interruption. This is not detachment. It's depth. It's not withdrawal. It's intimacy. When you linger with the aftertaste of the moment, you are not clinging. You are honoring. You are not replaying. You are sensing. The world becomes quieter, not because it changed, but because you've tuned in to what it's always been saying beneath the surface. You begin to see that the silence after the sound carries the full meaning of the sound itself. Even in the body, this can be practiced. After a breath, before the next one comes. After a stretch, before the muscles re-engage. After a step, as the weight shifts. You don't need to insert thought. You don't need to control anything. You simply stop filling the gap. Let the gap breathe on its own. Let the nervous system learn that not every pause is a threat. That stillness can be held. That quiet doesn't mean absence. It means presence without occupation. Emotional experience shifts as well. When a feeling passes, instead of bracing for the next, you stay. You feel the cooling, the releasing, the space where intensity used to be. You don't replace it. You don't interpret it. You just let the aftertaste guide your attention. And slowly, you begin to see that awareness isn't dependent on content. It remains when the story ends. It holds the world even when the world offers nothing to hold. This begins to alter your relationship with impermanence. Instead of fearing what fades, you start to meet it with softness, not because you don't care, but because you've learned how to stay with what goes. You are no longer trying to freeze moments. You're no longer needing them to last. You trust that their trace is enough, that their echo contains the fullness of their sound. You become more available to life because you're no longer trying to keep it from ending. Even memory starts to shift. You don't hold on to events. You rest in the presence that remains. You stop constructing identity from what happened. You feel the tone of your experience, not the content. You walk through your day with less internal narration because you trust that the resonance of the moment is already complete. You no longer need to capture it with language. You simply let it rest inside you. The more you allow these after moments, the more peaceful your inner world becomes, not because it's empty, but because it's undisturbed. You are not reaching into the future. You are not clinging to the past. You are resting in the subtle now, the place where reality breathes without form. You are not trying to find yourself in experience. You are letting experience dissolve into what you've always been. This practice does not dull your life. It enriches it. You feel more, not less. You sense layers that were hidden by activity. The ordinary becomes luminous, not through intensity, but through what it leaves behind. A sip of tea and the warmth it left on your tongue, the sound of a bird and the openness that followed. These are not background. They are the texture of presence once the surface has passed. You also begin to speak differently, slower, more aware of the space between words, more comfortable with silence at the end of a sentence. You don't rush to fill it. You don't apologize for it. You let others rest in it too. You stop trying to be the source of meaning. You let meaning arise in the quiet that follows. This shifts relationships. You listen more deeply. You no longer think of what to say next while someone is still speaking. You let their words settle. You feel their tone linger. You meet them not just in conversation, but in the space where connection actually happens, in the moments between what's said. Presence becomes less about what you do and more about what you don't rush through. You stop speeding through transitions. You stop skipping over endings. You let each phase of the day, each movement of attention, fade fully before turning. You stop stacking experiences. You start allowing each one to complete itself. And when something ends inside you, a mood, a thought, an identity, you stop panicking. You don't need to replace it. You let it pass and remain in the space that opens. That space becomes home. Not because it holds something specific, but because it holds you without demand. There's no goal here, no state to hold, no insight to protect, just the willingness to linger a little longer in what most people leave too soon. The willingness to stay when there's nothing left to grasp. And in that staying, you learn the deepest lesson of all, that what remains after experience is not less than experience. It is what made the experience possible in the first place. As the aftertaste fades and you rest in what no longer needs to stay, something else quietly makes itself known. Not a sound, not a sensation, more like a pull. It's subtle but persistent. A feeling that something is missing, even in stillness. A gentle disturbance just below the surface. Not enough to name, but enough to feel. You're not being pulled forward or backward. You're being pulled inward, towards something you haven't fully seen, something you've lived around for years, maybe your whole life. Not a fear, not a memory, a question, one you haven't asked, or one you don't know you've been avoiding. There are questions that bring answers, and there are questions that bring silence. The second kind is more powerful. Not because they solve something, but because they break the need for solutions. These are the questions that don't arrive as language. They arrive as tension, as the places you won't look, as the discomfort that shows up every time things get quiet. They aren't hidden from your eyes, they're hidden from your attention. You move past them without noticing, but they are there, quietly shaping your every moment. This is what some Zen traditions speak to when they offer koans. Not riddles to solve, but openings to sit with. Koans are not answers. They are mirrors. They reflect the place where the mind can't dominate the truth, where control ends, where logic stops. The unasked question is a koan you carry without knowing. It's not that you haven't answered it, it's that you haven't let yourself feel it. And this absence is not a lack, it's a doorway. To begin working with this doorway, you first learn to recognize the signs of avoidance. Not dramatic, not obvious. The habits that distract, the patterns that repeat, the things you always explain away. You say it's just how life is. You say you've moved past it. You say it doesn't matter. But your body knows. It tightens when the topic is close. It drifts when the silence gets too full. This is the edge of your present awareness, the line you haven't crossed. Not because you can't, but because you haven't looked with fresh eyes. You don't need to find the question right away. You only need to sit with the space where something hasn't yet been asked. It may feel like uncertainty, like discomfort without form, like a thought you can almost feel but not quite think. Stay there. This is where real presence begins to deepen, not in clarity, but in the willingness to remain with the unclear. Most people avoid what they can't immediately understand. But the unasked question doesn't want an answer. It wants honesty. It wants you to sit beside it without forcing it to reveal itself. This is radical curiosity, not the kind that investigates to solve, but the kind that listens without demand. You're not trying to dig something up. You're creating space so that what has been waiting can finally appear. Presence becomes something more refined here, no longer about attention to the senses or stillness in the breath. It becomes about the capacity to allow unknowns without turning away. You are not thinking your way through this. You are letting the unknown speak in its own timing. You are letting the mind soften its grip, letting the heart feel what it has never said. Sometimes the question isn't hidden, it's just uncomfortable. What are you pretending not to want? What would change if you told the truth? Who would you be without the version of you you've defended? These are not accusations. They are openings, not to shame you, but to reveal where you've mistaken comfort for peace. They show you the cracks in the identity you've built, and when you stay, those cracks become the light. You start to notice that what you were avoiding is not the question, it's what the question dissolves. Identity, belief, role, certainty. The mind likes to define itself, but these deep questions take those definitions apart, not violently, gently, with precision. And as the false edges fall away, what remains is not confusion, it's presence, untouched by story. The unasked question is often simple. Why do I keep busy when I feel lonely? Why do I speak when I could stay silent? Why do I seek approval from people who don't see me? You may think you know the answer. But this isn't about explanation. It's about being willing to let the question live in you without covering it with reason. You let it sit there, unresolved. And in that unresolved space, clarity that is not verbal begins to grow. Meditation changes here. It's no longer a break from thought. It becomes a holding space for what hasn't been said. You sit, and the question is there, not demanding, not shouting, just quietly waiting. You feel it more than hear it. It's in your chest, your stomach, your jaw. Not pain, but pressure. And the longer you stay, the more it softens. Not because you've solved it, because you've stopped denying it. Insight doesn't always come in words. Sometimes it comes in tears, in silence, in stillness that feels like surrender. You stop needing to understand. You start trusting the not knowing. This is presence without force, awareness without judgment, inquiry without agenda. You are not excavating trauma. You are not analyzing personality. You are simply staying with what is unfinished and letting it be seen. There is no rush. The deeper the question, the slower it unfolds. Some questions aren't meant to be answered. They are meant to be honored. They are meant to be held like a candle in a dark room. The light they offer is not found by burning them down. It is found by letting them stay lit, even when they don't show you the whole room. In this space, fear changes. You're no longer afraid of what you don't know. You're no longer driven by the need to define. You begin to find strength in not knowing. You begin to meet others with more compassion because you no longer expect them to have all the answers either. You speak less with certainty. You listen more with humility. The unasked question also reveals where you're still seeking control. Why do I need to be seen this way? What would happen if I failed on purpose? Who am I when I stop trying to be good? These are not just curiosities. They are thresholds. And the more you sit with them, the more the edges of the self begin to soften. You stop polishing your image. You stop rehearsing your life. You start living from what's real, even when it's quiet, messy, or unresolved. This kind of honesty transforms everything. You can no longer pretend to be somewhere you're not. You no longer chase clarity for the sake of comfort. You stop moving toward ease and begin moving toward truth. And this truth is not harsh. It's freeing. It's the truth that doesn't need to be spoken to be lived. The truth that you are not finished and never need to be. Practice becomes less structured. You no longer sit to accomplish. You sit to stay open. You listen not for messages, but for silence that speaks through your willingness to remain. You allow the question to rest inside you like a koan, with no answer and infinite possibility. You are no longer a seeker. You are the space in which seeking quiets. What you were avoiding was never the question. It was the intimacy of meeting yourself without defense. And now that you're here, you see that you were never hiding something dark. You were hiding the part of you that didn't know what to do next. And that's where presence begins, not with direction, but with honesty. So, sit again. Let the questions you haven't thought of come forward, not to be solved, but to be welcomed. Let them shape your silence. Let them change your breath. Let them lead you not to answers, but to depth. This is the path beneath the path, the layer of truth that waits quietly, beneath everything you thought you already understood. As you begin to sit with the questions that have long been waiting, those quiet, unfinished edges of the self, you start to notice how easily they stir something deeper. Not always insight, often intensity, sometimes grief, sometimes agitation, sometimes waves of emotion that come all at once. You're not doing anything wrong. This is the natural unfolding. The more honestly you meet yourself, the more deeply the hidden energy begins to move. And when it does, the mind's usual response is to pull away. But the real practice is not found after the storm. It's found inside it. Not as recovery, but as presence that refuses to leave. Meditation is often misunderstood as something you return to once chaos has ended, a place to go when things calm down, a reset, a way back to balance. But if you only practice when life is quiet, the practice never gets tested. And if it never gets tested, it doesn't transform you. Presence isn't about waiting for stillness. It's about discovering the stillness that exists even while everything else falls apart. The calm is not outside the storm. It is at the center of it. Overwhelm has texture. It's not just an emotional label. It's a physical wave, a mental flood, a sensory overload. You feel it in the chest, in the jaw, in the breath. The mind scrambles, the body tenses, attention fragments, and in that space most people try to escape. But if you look more closely, there is a center. There is always a center. It's not dramatic, it's not soothing, it's just stable, quiet, hidden beneath the layers, but it's there, waiting to be entered. This center is not a place you imagine. It's a felt reality that becomes more accessible when you stop resisting what's happening. Not by agreeing with it, but by allowing it. You feel the surge of emotion, and instead of trying to calm it down, you breathe inside it. You stop pushing it away. You feel the heat of anger, the sharpness of fear, the density of sadness. And you bring your attention closer, not farther. You go into the body, into the breath, into the raw aliveness that chaos awakens. The nervous system may want to tighten. That's natural, but within that contraction is a deeper space that doesn't flinch. The practice is not to fight the overwhelm, nor to wait for it to end. It's to find the unmoving point inside of it, the stillness that doesn't disappear, even in discomfort. You're not using meditation as a way to bypass intensity. You're using it as a way to enter it more fully, with presence as your anchor. To do this, you must stay in the body. Thought will try to pull you into stories, why this is happening, how long it will last, who's to blame. That is not the way. Let the thoughts move, but don't climb into them. Bring awareness to sensation, not as a concept, but as direct contact. What is actually happening? Where is the strongest feeling? What is the shape of the discomfort? Not what does it mean, but what does it feel like right now? You're not analyzing, you're witnessing, not with detachment, but with full contact. The body becomes your field of practice. You are not trying to fix it, you are staying with it. The breath may be shallow, notice that. The muscles may be bracing, stay there. The heart may be racing, listen to it. You are not trying to relax your way out. You are resting your awareness inside the very thing that usually drives you away. What begins to emerge is not peace in the way people usually understand it. It's not comfort. It's clarity. A kind of grounded seeing that remains even while the storm rages. The content of the emotion doesn't vanish, but your relationship to it changes. You are no longer at the mercy of it. You are aware within it. And that awareness changes the experience, not by controlling it, but by no longer feeding it resistance. Most people treat their emotional life like weather to wait out. They survive until it passes. But waiting is not presence, it's postponement. You learn more by staying in the eye of the hurricane than by hoping it moves. You begin to see that even the most overwhelming moments have a rhythm, a beginning, a peak, a decline. You watch it all unfold, not from distance, but from within. This is not emotional indulgence. This is true strength. The key is not to reduce sensation, but to reduce identification. Overwhelm intensifies when we believe the thoughts it brings. But the sensation itself, without story, is workable. It may be sharp, but it's not endless. It may be heavy, but it's not solid. When you stop describing the chaos and start feeling it directly, it shifts. Not because you made it shift, but because it was never permanent. This kind of practice requires honesty. It asks you to stop pretending you're above emotional reactivity. It asks you to stop performing calm and to meet what is real, not as failure, but as part of the path. The more you enter the emotion, the more you see that it's made of movement, not identity. You are not anxious. You are feeling anxiety. You are not depressed. You are experiencing heaviness. This difference is not semantic. It is everything. And once this becomes embodied, you stop fearing the next wave. You stop needing life to stay balanced. You don't panic when the ground shakes. You know how to return, not after the fact, but in the middle. You find the breath that is still there. You find the contact point in the body that brings you back. You let the storm move through without pushing it or collapsing under it. This is not always comfortable, but it is always real. And reality is what liberates. When you allow yourself to stay in full presence with discomfort, the separation between you and life begins to fall away. You are no longer managing experience. You are inside it, awake, steady, available. And this steadiness is not emotional neutrality. It's attentional stability. You're not frozen. You're not reacting. You're not absent. You are here. In daily life, this becomes a way of walking. The traffic jam becomes the practice. The argument becomes the mirror. The deadline becomes the fire you learn to breathe inside. You're not waiting for quiet. You are listening within noise. You are softening inside pressure. You are choosing to be conscious in the exact place that consciousness usually disappears. As this deepens, a new trust develops. Not trust that everything will feel good, but trust that you can meet what feels bad without abandoning yourself. You stop living in defense. You stop trying to escape your nervous system. You enter it. You stay with it. And it learns over time that it is safe to feel, that it doesn't need to panic when intensity rises, that it can hold all of it without collapse. This shift is not easy, but it is clean. It's not dramatic, but it's powerful. The world doesn't get quieter. You become less fragile. Not by toughening, but by softening where it matters. You stop pushing the storm away. You walk to its center. And from that center, you don't try to control it. You simply remain. After learning to remain in the center of chaos, to stay present not after, but inside the moment when everything unravels, another layer of stillness becomes visible. It's not a stillness found through resolution. It's a stillness that lives inside the unresolved. There is a deeper kind of peace that appears not when things are completed, but when you finally stop needing them to be. Not everything finishes neatly. Not every question gets answered. Not every moment brings closure. And the pressure to tie everything together is often what keeps you restless. There's a quiet struggle in the human mind to complete, to wrap up, to explain, to finish. It shows up in conversations you rehearse long after they end, in tasks you started and never returned to, in stories from the past that you keep trying to retell just a little better. The deeper drive isn't about productivity, it's about identity. You want to feel like a whole person, and wholeness gets confused with completion. But life doesn't arrive in finished forms, and you are not a project to be completed. You are a process that includes everything that's still in progress. This discomfort with incompletion is deeply conditioned. You're taught to finish what you start, to solve what's broken, to define what's vague. But many experiences were never meant to resolve. Some stories have no ending. Some feelings have no explanation. Some parts of you will never line up with the rest. And when you stop resisting this, you begin to discover a different kind of balance. Not the balance of symmetry, but the balance of being okay with what's uneven, open, and still unfolding. In practice, this means meeting the unfinished parts of your life with awareness, not with urgency. That old conversation you still think about, let it be incomplete. That goal you abandoned halfway through, let it remain open. That relationship that didn't end cleanly, let it stay unresolved in your memory. These are not errors. They are the shape of real life. Real life includes the pause, the gap, the silence that doesn't get filled. This isn't passivity, it's presence. You're not giving up on things that matter. You're giving up the illusion that everything has to be wrapped in a bow before you can rest. When you hold space for what's unfinished, you stop living in opposition to the moment. You stop trying to fix every loose thread. You begin to allow the mind to rest, even as the details remain unpolished. There's a humility in this, a recognition that not all truths arrive when you want them to. That clarity doesn't always show up on schedule, that sometimes the deepest insight comes from simply staying with the part of you that doesn't know what comes next. You don't need to finish healing to feel whole. You don't need to finish explaining to be understood. You don't need to finish growing to feel grounded. Even in meditation, this applies. You don't sit to reach a certain state. You sit to remain open to what is. Some days are clear, some are restless, some bring peace, some bring noise. There's nothing to complete. There's only presence to return to, and presence doesn't require completion. It requires honesty. You acknowledge what hasn't settled, and you stay with it, not to push it into resolution, but to stop turning away. The same goes for emotional experience. You feel something rise, and it doesn't lead to a clear story. You don't understand it. You can't name it. You want to move on, but something holds. Instead of trying to finish the emotional arc, you let it stay open. You let the heart remain in the shape it's in. No fixing, no forcing, just awareness that doesn't abandon what it doesn't yet understand. This also shifts your relationship with memory. Some moments from the past will never make sense. Some wounds will never be followed by apology. Some people you loved will remain unfinished chapters. And still, you can find peace, not by closing the story, but by realizing you don't need to. Peace comes not from control, but from spaciousness, the ability to breathe inside what hasn't yet resolved. The mind will still reach. It will still try to wrap things up. That's natural. But now, you don't follow every impulse to conclude. You notice it. You pause. You return to the breath. You let the story float. You watch the unfinished pieces drift, and you let them move without trying to contain them. This is not detachment. This is a new kind of presence, one that doesn't flinch in the face of ambiguity. This openness changes how you relate to time. You stop rushing through moments. You stop racing toward answers. You live in the unfolding, not in the completion. You let the day remain imperfect. You let the task remain halfway done. You let yourself remain a work in progress, not because you've given up, but because you've grown enough to stop needing closure as proof of growth. And this begins to soften the edges of how you see others. You don't demand perfect communication. You don't expect every conversation to resolve. You allow others to be unfinished too. You stop needing everyone to make sense. You stop needing every relationship to find its conclusion. You learn to love without needing to define, to forgive without needing full understanding, to say goodbye without needing full peace. Even your spiritual path becomes less rigid. You stop treating it like a ladder to climb. You stop measuring your evolution by how many insights you've had. You allow for dry spells, for confusion, for not knowing. You let your practice remain open-ended, not lost, not drifting, simply not closed. And in that openness, depth returns. Not depth you hold on to, but depth that holds you. The world reflects this too. Nature is filled with cycles that never finish, seeds that never bloom, seasons that arrive late or early or not at all. The sky doesn't demand that the clouds move in clean patterns. The river doesn't require every stone to be smooth. Everything is in motion and nothing is fully done. Life is not a story with a clear arc. It's a rhythm that includes interruption, delay, and silence. So you learn to live with pauses, with the page that turns before the sentence ends, with the meal left uneaten, with the song that fades without resolution. You learn to love the part of you that hasn't figured it all out. You stop fighting the undone. You let it rest beside you, and you rest with it, not as a problem, but as part of your path. And in this resting, something unexpected happens. You feel more whole, not because everything has resolved, but because you're no longer cutting yourself off from what hasn't. You're not scattered, you're not fractured, you're simply complete in your incompletion, present with what's still unfolding. When you stop needing everything to be resolved, you begin to taste what presence truly is, not as a concept, but as direct experience. You're no longer waiting for closure. You're not living in the next moment. You're here. And from that here-ness, something remarkable begins to return. Your senses. Not just as functional tools, but as entry points into the immediacy of life. Nowhere is this more intimate, more accessible, or more overlooked than in the act of eating. Not eating as habit or distraction or fuel, but as a way into timelessness, the taste of now. Eating is one of the most frequent and physical rituals we engage in, and yet, for most people, it happens on autopilot. You chew while reading, while scrolling, while thinking about what's next. The bite is consumed, but it's never really received. The flavor is there, but it's gone before it's noticed. And what's missed isn't just the taste. It's the opportunity to exit the timeline of becoming and re-enter direct contact with being. Mindful eating is more than slowing down. It's a complete shift in orientation. It means letting the moment of taste become enough. One bite, not as a bridge to the next, not as a way to satisfy a future hunger, but as the whole experience. You are not eating to get anywhere. You are not chewing to achieve. You are staying with this texture, this warmth, this tang, this crunch, this now. Each time you eat, you have a chance to re-enter presence, not symbolically. Actually, the flavor doesn't exist in memory. It doesn't exist in imagination. It lives for just a few seconds on your tongue, and then it vanishes. If you miss it, it's gone. If you stay, it becomes the doorway into timeless awareness. The moment where thinking stops and experience becomes direct. There is no need for a special meal. It doesn't have to be gourmet. A simple piece of fruit will do. What matters is your attention, not narrowed by force, but relaxed into sensitivity. You don't focus, you allow. You let your awareness rest fully in the process of tasting. You notice the first contact, the slight release of flavor, the evolution of sensation as the bite dissolves. You stay, not out of discipline, but out of reverence for the now that it reveals. You're not trying to be present. You're letting the body guide you into presence. Taste is immediate. It cannot be faked. It requires no analysis, no story, no preparation. It simply asks to be felt, and when you meet it with full attention, it delivers you into the one moment that actually exists, this one. This moment becomes even more rich when you stop rushing. Most people chew to get to the next bite, but what if you stayed with this one? What if you let it complete itself before reaching forward? You would begin to discover the difference between satisfaction and projection. Satisfaction lives now, projection lives later, and the more you taste what is, the less you chase what isn't. You start to feel the truth of your hunger. Not all of it is physical. Some of it is mental. Some of it is emotional. Some of it is the absence of now being filled with the promise of later. But when you eat with presence, that hunger changes. It stops being a hole to fill and becomes an experience to meet. The craving softens, not because you're full, but because you're finally here. Mindful eating is also about honesty. How much do you really taste when you eat? How much is automatic? How often are you chewing while scrolling, reading, or worrying? How often are you using food as a way to avoid the moment rather than enter it? This is not a criticism, it's a doorway. Awareness begins where habits are questioned. And when you question your habits around eating, you begin to see how deeply the mind tries to escape now. Each bite is a chance to stop running, not by freezing, but by feeling. The movement of your jaw, the temperature, the shift of texture, the sensation of swallowing. These are not distractions, they are invitations. You're not separate from the moment when you're truly eating. You are merged with it. Not as a self thinking about eating, but as life directly knowing itself through flavor. This knowing is different from thought. It has no subject, no commentary, just direct contact. You're not the observer of the bite. You are the tasting. And in that shift, the mind's usual structures loosen. You are no longer the eater and the food. You are simply the experience happening now. And this is why mindful eating is more than a wellness technique. It is a doorway into non-duality. Over time, this practice reshapes your relationship with food. It becomes less about what you eat and more about how you meet it. You stop labeling food as good or bad. You stop assigning moral weight to your meals. You stop eating based on stories and start eating based on presence. And when you do that, something remarkable happens. You eat less, but feel more satisfied. Not because you're controlling yourself, but because you're receiving more. You also stop rushing through meals. Even the smallest snack becomes sacred, not because you've made it holy, but because you've finally slowed down enough to meet it. You feel the silence between bites, the breath between chews. You don't need conversation. You don't need background noise. The moment is enough. This doesn't mean you have to eat alone or in silence. You can practice mindful eating anywhere, with others, in public, at home. It's not about perfection. It's about remembering, coming back, again and again. When you notice you're rushing, return. When you find yourself lost in thought, return. Not with judgment, with curiosity, with softness. Even digestion begins to shift. The body relaxes when the mind is present. Food is received more fully. You're not bracing. You're not rushing. You're simply allowing. And this state of allowing becomes your new default, not just in eating, but in life. You learn to stay, not because it's a rule, because it feels like truth. Mindful eating also reveals your emotional relationship with food. Not by analyzing, just by observing. When you eat slowly, you notice when you're full. You notice when you're reaching for food to cover a feeling. You don't have to stop, you just have to see. Seeing is enough. Clarity grows from presence, not from discipline. There's a deeper freedom in this than most people expect. You begin to feel at peace with what's on your plate. You stop needing it to fix your mood. You stop using it to escape the moment. And in doing so, food becomes nourishment. Not just for the body, but for the part of you that longs to be here. And it's not just during the meal. The preparation becomes part of the practice. The way you cut a vegetable, the way you hold a spoon, the sound of water boiling. These are not chores, they are textures of presence. You stop rushing to finish the task and start meeting the task as it unfolds. The kitchen becomes a temple, not because it's quiet, but because you are. Even after the meal, the practice continues. You feel the lingering taste, the warmth in the stomach, the satisfaction not of fullness, but of having truly met the moment. You don't need to move on right away. You don't need dessert. You don't need the next stimulation. You are content, not because you got what you wanted, but because you stayed with what was already there. This rewires something deep. The nervous system learns to feel safe in presence. You're no longer scanning the horizon for what's next. You're resting in what's now. This is how eating becomes meditation, not in posture but in depth, not in silence but in contact, not in ritual but in attention. And from here, all of life begins to shift. Not dramatically, gently. You start to approach other activities the same way. Walking, listening, touching, speaking. Each one becomes a way to enter now. Not now as a concept, now as the only place life ever happens. As you become more sensitive to the texture of experience, whether through a single bite of food, the way it fades, or the lingering presence that follows, you start to see what stands just behind every moment of attention. The impulse to return to someone, not just to the act, but to the actor. A soft flicker of re-identity. It happens so fast you don't notice it, but it's always there. A feeling arises, and a self quickly forms around it. A thought appears, and ownership is claimed. The moment breathes, and within that breath, the mind tries to rebuild the I that had briefly dissolved. This is the flicker of becoming. Every time you return to the present, the illusion of self is briefly interrupted. In that space, the world feels whole. Contact is direct. No one is in control. But the momentum of thought rarely allows that openness to last. It rushes in and fills the gap. A thought arises. A story forms. Meaning is attached. A subtle contraction takes place. And before you know it, you're someone again, thinking, reacting, trying, remembering. It feels natural because it's habitual, but the mechanism behind it is visible if you slow down enough to watch it assemble. This process is not malicious. It's how the mind has learned to orient. It collects sensation, stitches it together, references memory, and assigns meaning to preserve a sense of continuity. The result is identity, not as something you are, but as something the mind keeps recreating. This process doesn't stop because you're awake. It just becomes more transparent. And as it becomes transparent, it loses its grip. To observe this flicker of becoming, you must develop a different kind of seeing. Not the seeing that looks at experience, but the seeing that watches experience form. You notice when a thought is claimed, how the simple phrase, "I think," places a self before the thought. You notice how quickly an emotion becomes a personality, how sadness turns into, "I'm a sad person." You see the way sensation is claimed, labeled, folded into the sense of me. And the more you see it, the more unnecessary it feels. This is not about eliminating identity. It's about loosening the compulsion to construct it out of everything that arises. You stop needing to be someone in every moment. You stop reflexively turning events into self-definitions. A mistake doesn't mean you're flawed. A success doesn't mean you're superior. A fear doesn't mean you're weak. They're just phenomena moving through awareness. They don't need a container. They don't require a story. The mind tries to turn each moment into a mirror, hoping to confirm that you are what you think you are. But when you don't join that effort, the mirror breaks. What's left is presence without identity, experience without the weight of being someone in particular. This isn't confusion, it's freedom. You're not erasing yourself. You're seeing that what you took to be yourself was never fixed. In daily life, this means catching the flicker before it becomes a flame. You hear a comment, and the mind starts to form a reaction. They don't respect me. Pause. Watch that identity form. Notice how quickly the me appears, not because the moment demanded it, but because the habit of becoming was triggered. Instead of following it, you observe, not passively, but with clarity. The moment passes, the identity dissolves. You remain without narrative, without defense. This practice requires patience. The identity habit is deep. It rebuilds itself constantly. You sit in stillness, and the mind creates a good meditator. You say something kind, and a compassionate person is formed. You lose your temper, and the impatient one returns. None of these identities are permanent. They are mental snapshots, quickly taken and believed. But if you notice them as they form, you don't have to carry them. You begin to recognize that even your most cherished roles are fluid. The role of friend, of partner, of teacher, of seeker. These are not who you are. They are functions. When the function arises, the role appears. When the function ends, the role fades. What remains is awareness, unlabeled, unchanged, untouched by the mask it just wore. This shifts your sense of self at the deepest level. You stop trying to improve the one you thought you were. You stop trying to prove anything. You stop turning presence into performance. You live with more honesty because there's no character to defend. You can be quiet without being absent. You can be strong without being rigid. You can be uncertain without being lost. You also start to see how much energy goes into maintaining identity. The need to remember who you are, the need to compare yourself to others, the need to interpret every experience in terms of its impact on me. When this softens, you feel lighter. The mind gets quieter. Life becomes more direct, more vivid. Not because you've figured out who you are, but because you've stopped insisting that you need to. Even the body reflects this. You carry less tension in the face, in the shoulders, in the belly. There's no need to brace for confirmation or rejection. You don't need to defend a self-image. You don't need to rehearse your story. You meet life from presence, not from persona. And the moment becomes more complete because it's no longer filtered through the need to be someone in it. This doesn't make you passive. It makes you real. You respond more naturally. You speak more clearly. You act without overthinking. Because there's less self to manage, less self to maintain. You are not fading. You are finally present. Without the background noise of self-reference, you begin to love others differently too. You see that they are also rebuilding themselves moment by moment. Their anger is not who they are. Their kindness isn't permanent either. You stop needing people to be consistent. You stop putting them in boxes. You hold space for their fluidity because you've recognized your own. Relationships soften. Expectations loosen. Authenticity becomes more natural. And still, the flicker continues. The mind will keep trying to rebuild. That's okay. You don't fight it. You see it, gently, thought by thought, label by label, story by story. You're not trying to stop the mechanism. You're simply no longer lost inside it. And that shift is enough. This is not a state to maintain. It's a recognition to return to. The I is always trying to rebuild itself. You catch it, you smile, you rest again. The process of becoming doesn't have to stop for you to be free. You only need to see that it's not what you are. You are the field in which it flickers, the silence in which it plays, the clarity that remains, whether it forms or not. You've just traveled through the quiet heart of some of the deepest Buddhist insights, not as concepts, but as living invitations. You've rested in the space before karma begins. You've touched the unborn nature of mind. You've watched the flicker of identity, held space for what's unfinished, and let silence speak louder than thought. You've remembered that peace isn't found after the noise, but within it. That the present moment isn't something to reach, it's something to return to, again and again. These teachings are not meant to be mastered all at once. They're meant to be lived gently, felt deeply, and rediscovered daily. In your breath, in a single bite of food, in the way your body rests before sleep. This isn't the end of a lesson. It's the beginning of a quieter way of being. Not by changing who you are, but by no longer turning away from what you already are. If something in these words touched you, if a sentence slowed your breath or made you feel just a little more still, let it be known. Leave a comment below and share the one insight or moment that stayed with you. Not for us, but for you. Sometimes writing it down is how we begin to live it. And if you'd like more of this, more space, more stillness, more teachings to carry into your day and night, subscribe to the channel. Let this be a place you come back to when you need to remember what you already know. Now rest. Let go. The present moment is still here, and it's enough.